Oh wow, there's a hole in the bottom of the ocean. It seems that the ocean has a leak. But it's not like a leak you would expect, where water is flowing out. It's more like a spring since water is flowing in, not out. This unique leak is something we know as Pythia's oasis. A grad student was the one who accidentally discovered it. He noticed bubbles that were rising to the surface. Normally, bubbles in the ocean tell us there might be some hydrothermal vents, which are hotspots for some pretty cool things. These vents are actually like hot springs on the seafloor, but instead of bubbling with warm water, they release a fluid that has been superheated in the crust of our planet. When seawater seeps into these cracks and travels deep into the crust, it comes into contact with the extremely hot mantle. This heats seawater to very high temperatures, and as it moves back up towards the surface, it carries dissolved gases and minerals. When the hot fluid shoots out of the vents, it mixes with the surrounding seawater and quickly cools down. Just a short distance away from the vent, the temperature can drop to a comfortable 68 degrees Fahrenheit or so, which is, as it seems, exactly what some creatures like. And there are some real weirdos living down there in the darkness, like ghostly fish, giant red-tipped tube worms, and a unique type of shrimp with eyes on their back. And some of them, like tube worms and bacteria, rely on the chemicals and minerals released by the vents to survive in harsh conditions. But in this case, the bubbling water didn't come from a hydrothermal vent. It was there because of a spring, and that's a bit more concerning. You see, the water in this reservoir needs to stay where it is. If too much of it seeps out, there could be some serious consequences, especially for the surrounding area. You can see this unusual leak along the Cascadia subduction zone, which is a massive fault line off the Pacific Northwest coast. It's a place where two pretty big plates that make up Earth's crust come together and slide along each other. The water from Pythia's oasis kinda acts as a lubricant between these plates. You can think of the fault zone as an air hockey table. When the fluid pressure is high, it's like you've turned the air on. That means the friction between the plates is reduced, which allows the plates to move. But if the fluid pressure is lower, the two plates can lock together, which then leads to the buildup of stress. Not that they'll feel bad. In the context of tectonic plates, stress is some pressure or force that can cause deformation. And if this stress starts to build up, at some point, it's gotta go somewhere. When it's too much, it can trigger earthquakes and most likely, not small ones. For example, a release of stress in the Cascadia subduction zone could lead to a magnitude 9 earthquake. For comparison, the biggest earthquake we've ever recorded happened in Chile in 1960. And it had a magnitude of 9.5. The damage was enormous. So we hope the water will stay in its reservoir and keep maintaining the delicate balance between the tectonic plates. We've explored only 5% of the ocean. Who knows how many cool things are there at the bottom, waiting to be found? For example, check out these mysterious holes scientists have stumbled upon in the depths of the Atlantic Ocean, near the Azores. They're neatly aligned and are about 4 inches apart, or in some cases, even several feet. They resemble punctures left by a sewing machine. Some think these holes could have a biological origin. For instance, some fish may have made them while walking along the seafloor. Others believe we could be looking at something that's human-made, maybe left by a spiked tire. Of course, such holes are perfect for making up stories about creatures from other planets who allegedly made them. Or maybe even legendary monsters, like that one from Loch Ness. It's definitely hard to explain such symmetry of the holes, but one deep-sea biologist offered a pretty good explanation. He said there could be an animal burrowing beneath the sediment, and from time to time, it could make little chimneys just to get access to clean water circulation in its small burrow. I mean, there are sediment piles around the opening of each hole, and they do support the idea that something pushed the soil from below. But there's still no proof these holes are actually connected beneath the surface. And there are also a lot of things hidden at the bottom of the oceans and seas that ancient civilizations left us. For instance, archaeologists made a really cool discovery off the southern coast of Croatia. A road hidden under layers of sea mud that's 7,000 years old. They found the ancient road at the sunken Neolithic site of Solin. The site of Solin was a human-made island in ancient times, and an archaeologist discovered it 2 years ago. He was studying satellite images of the area around Korčula, one of the beautiful Croatian islands. When he realized there could be something interesting at the bottom of the sea, he dove into the water with his colleague. And under the surface of the Adriatic Sea, which is part of the Mediterranean Sea, at a depth of 13 to 16 feet, they found stone walls that were most likely part of some ancient settlement. The landmass where people built the settlement was separated from the main island by a narrow stretch of land. Luckily, this area is protected from big waves by the surrounding islands, so the site remained relatively well preserved. It's now hidden beneath the surface of the sea and covered in mud. But it's so exciting to imagine how people walked on that road nearly 7,000 years ago, visiting nearby settlements. If you want to see the weirdest creatures, you can always head to the bottom of the sea. Actually, scientists have determined there could be more than 30 potentially new species at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. They've collected them using their remote-controlled vehicle. That's a big step because until recently, they could only study such creatures through photographs. I'm talking about segmented worms, different types of coral, some invertebrates similar to centipedes, and many others. But there are also many old freaky creatures that we already know about that look like they came from sci-fi movies. Red octopus, blobfish. Okay, this one kinda looks normal until you raise it to the surface. The goblin shark, Sloane's viperfish, zombie worms. Ugh. Yeah, I hear ya. Let's move on. The seafloor hides things from space too. There are traces of rare forms of plutonium and iron at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. And what's awesome is that all this has come from space. These radioactive materials probably formed during some kind of cataclysmic event in space and eventually made their way out to our beautiful home planet. And this extraterrestrial debris most likely appeared on Earth within the past 10 million years. After it fell to the Pacific Ocean and settled at a depth of almost a mile, it became part of all those layers of rock down there. Plutonium is especially exciting for scientists. I mean, only tiny amounts of it have been found. Hundreds of atoms maybe. But it's still remarkable because these atoms are created by exploding stars. Things like this can help us better understand how the universe produces elements heavier than iron, like plutonium, gold, uranium, and platinum. We're still not sure about the origins of these elements. For a long time, scientists believed that supernovae, which is when a star comes to its end in a fabulous explosion, were responsible for creating these heavy elements. But it seems it's not just that. Some other cosmic events, such as the collision of neutron stars, which are super dense collapsed stars, or some rare types of supernovae, could also be involved. Whoa, let me get my popcorn.
Architecture shapes the world around us. If I say Paris, the first thing that normally comes to mind is the image of the Eiffel Tower, right? But imagine if, instead of a tower, Paris's landscape was dominated by a huge guillotine. I bet our selfies would look quite different, huh? We'd have to cut some people out of the picture. Okay, never mind. A lot of famous landmarks almost look very different than they do today. So how about we take a trip down history lane and take a look at them? What American city is so loved that it had to be named twice? Why, it's New York, New York, of course. New York City's skyline is made out of many iconic structures. The most symbolic of them all is probably the Statue of Liberty. Now, there's a lot people don't know about this monument. Like the fact that it was originally copper-colored, but it turned green due to patina oxidation of the copper. More surprising curiosity about the statue is that it was almost modeled after an Egyptian woman. Historians say that Lady Liberty's sculptor was fascinated by Egyptian monuments. Apparently, this design existed, but it didn't go ahead due to its high cost. Well, that would have been a different sight, huh? Now here's a riddle for you. What is white, important, and houses presidents? You guessed it, it's the White House. One of the world's most important buildings. Its neoclassical design, large frontal pillars, and green lawn are something we're all very familiar with. Now, how about we delve into some historical archives and imagine what this house almost looked like? President George Washington opened and judged a competition for the design of the presidential residence. Several designs almost made it through. For instance, this simple yet classic design was submitted by Thomas Jefferson himself. Or this James Diamond design that suggested an entrance with two mirrored spiral staircases. The most famous of the rejected designs was Philip Hart's, which looked as if the executive mansion was double everything. It featured a 3-story building with 2 front balconies. It looks a bit too much, wouldn't you say? Washington ultimately chose James Hoban's design, an Irish architect that modeled the plans after the House of Parliament in Dublin, his hometown. And President Theodore Roosevelt gave it its nickname, the White House, in 1907. It's certainly difficult to imagine London without the iconic Tower Bridge. Opened in 1894, it took over 8 years, 70,000 tons of concrete, and 432 workers to build the monument. It works as a drawbridge, stopping traffic every time a big ship wants to waltz through the Thames. Horace Jones proposed the winning design, but many alternatives were rejected. Tower Bridge could have had an arch that connected both towers, but it could have also looked like the number 8 if you were looking at it from above. This figure-8 model proposed by F.J. Palmer was a popular one. The designer's main idea was not to stop pedestrian vehicle flow in case a ship needed to pass, so he proposed a loop system. Each loop would have retractable sections, so if a ship wanted to pass, one section could be retracted and the ship could enter the center of the loop. The ship would be stuck at the center of the loop, waiting for the other retractable side to open. Meanwhile, traffic would continue without interruption. Now, even if this could be something positive, the city didn't pick this design because of its extremely complex engineering. I mean, imagine trying to build something like that. Ah, the City of Lights. Or is it the City of Love? Or croissants? Paris is by far the world's most visited city by tourists. People seem to love staring at the Eiffel Tower and eating a delicious croissant while wearing a beret, don't they? Can you imagine Paris without the Eiffel Tower? More than 700 designs were submitted for consideration, and the winner was Gustave Eiffel's tower design. You can find a monstrous lighthouse and even a giant guillotine in the pile of rejected designs. You heard right. Some proposed designs were eccentric. A designer proposed that the monument should celebrate the 100th anniversary of the French Revolution, which to him meant building a guillotine. Hey, let's not lose our heads over this. French engineer Eugène Fresnay proposed the Lighthouse of the World, a 980-feet lighthouse with lights so bright that the entire city could read newspapers at night. Now imagine something as tall as the Empire State Building and the Eiffel Tower stacked on top of each other. It would have a spiraling ramp all around it from top to bottom. This way, cars could reach the top of the lighthouse. All along the way, a 2,000-seat restaurant would be ready to serve excited diners who would eat enjoying the best of views. Aren't you just glad these designs never saw the light of day? Meanwhile, did you know that Benjamin Franklin suggested that the U.S. national bird should be a turkey, and that the U.S. Capitol Hill had a turkey-looking statue on top of it? Well, in 1792, Thomas Jefferson held an architectural competition to decide on the Capitol building's design. Jefferson, an architect himself, was the judge of this competition. The current building's design appeared late in the competition, so late that George Washington, the president at the time, was starting to become impatient. Amongst all the terrible entries, one certainly stood out from the crowd. Instead of the Capitol's beautiful dome, amateur architect James Diamond designed a building with a bird on top of it. Now, in his defense, it was a weather vane, supposedly representing a bald eagle, but it sure didn't look like it. Finally, in 1793, William Thornton's design appeared and pleased President Washington. He believed the building was an expression of grandeur and beauty, everything he expected of a place that would house the American Congress. Now, moving back to Paris, another monument looked a tad different than it is today. Strolling along the Champs-Élysées, you'd eventually stumble upon an iconic monument, the Arc de Triomphe. Napoleon commissioned this astonishing 160 feet tall arched monument to celebrate France's many victories. Jean Chalgrin, the landmark's architect, actually drew inspiration from a Roman monument, the Arco de Tito. However, 45 years before its construction, French architect Charles Ribot submitted another design, the so-called Éléphant triomphal. The design was, for lack of a better word, weird. You'd enter the elephant through its underbelly and find an astounding spiral staircase on the inside. The inside would be filled with extravagant decor and even a garden. The whole monument would stand 3 stories tall, and the original design even planned on installing a complex drainage system. Why? Because if you have an elephant monument in the middle of the city, it better spew water from its trunk. And in case you're wondering why the statue of an elephant was ever considered part of Paris's skyline, well, let's say it was due to a Renaissance-era fixation. Back then, elephants symbolized nobility and strength, everything the French were going for. Now, down under, Sydney's skyline almost looked like an entirely different landscape than the one we know today. In 1956, the city opened an international competition to choose a design for Sydney's new opera house. Danish architect Jorn Utzon eventually won the contest. He designed the sculptural, one-of-a-kind building we know today. Now in second place, another design from the Philadelphian Cooperative Group almost made the cut. Their design was much more brutal than Utzon's. It was inspired by a nautilus shell and consisted in a spiral form. It had big, full-height windows and a roof made from folded concrete. It almost looked like a vertical dish rack. And what if I told you that back in Washington, Lincoln's memorial almost looked like a pyramid? The memorial's design was down to 2 architects, John Russell Pope and Henry Bacon. Congress brought home the Bacon's neoclassical style design, but Pope submitted some interesting sketches that never saw the light of day. Inspired by monuments and memorials from other cultures, Pope suggested that the Lincoln Monument be many different things. It could have looked like a 250 feet tall Greek Parthenon, or it could have been a colossal ziggurat, a classical Mesopotamian pyramid. Well, that would have been different. Hey, anybody seen that elephant in the room?
We all love unicorns, those legendary creatures famous for their beauty. You're now thinking of a white horse with a spiraling horn on its forehead, and there's probably a rainbow somewhere nearby. But what are the origins of this image? And more importantly, can it be true? Well, yes and no. Let us start from the beginning. The name. It comes from Latin. Unicorn translates as one horn. Today, there is one land animal that fits the bill, the rhinoceros. The Greek name for a unicorn is monoceros, which again means one horn. So it all fits neatly. But wait. Isn't a unicorn a kind of horse? We need to call in science to resolve the issue. Scientists have discovered a skull of an animal that could have been the real unicorn and roamed the earth some 30,000 years ago. The animal resembled a huge, hairy rhinoceros, nothing like the image of a unicorn we have today. It was 2 times heavier than a giraffe, and its diet consisted of grass, a lot of grass. But the skull the scientists found in Central Asia revealed another surprising fact: the animal's age. Previous research pointed to the fact that the species went extinct 350,000 years ago. This meant that our ancestors never shared the same living space with this oversized rhinoceros. But the skull was dated much later. This dates the animal right around the time when humans were already there. This is where the legend begins. Imagine you're a prehistoric human who had just seen a unicorn. What would you do? It's not like you can take out a smartphone and snap a picture of it. No, you would probably paint it on a cave wall. Such drawings have survived to the present day. In France, there's an image of an animal that seems to have a single horn. It's in the Hall of the Bulls. All the other animals there have 2 wavy horns, but the mysterious spotted animal has 2 lines on its head. Do these double lines represent a single horn? Is this the famous unicorn? Perhaps. The name of the drawing is the unicorn panel. But images of unicorns don't only exist in cave drawings. In the Indus Valley, scientists have found various seals featuring a mythical animal with a single horn. Ancient Greek writers believed that unicorns lived in India. Back then, this region of the world was exotic to them. Although ancient Greeks never saw a unicorn, they had a pretty detailed description of the animal. They even recorded that the meat from this creature had a bitter taste. But was it a horse or a rhinoceros? Neither. For Greeks, the unicorn was a kind of a donkey. Go figure. In Chinese mythology, there's a similar creature. Its name translates into English, means male-female. The animal's description resembles a unicorn. A single horn on its forehead, the tail of an ox, and the body of a deer. It feeds on vegetation, just like the ancient rhinoceros from Central Asia. When the first giraffe was presented to the Ming Emperor, they described it as a unicorn. The ruler concluded that the animal definitely wasn't the mythical unicorn, but the legend lived on in that part of the world. The modern Japanese word for giraffe comes from the Chinese word for the unicorn-like creature. Ancient Persians also knew about the existence of unicorns. There's a picture of a unicorn in their capital city, but the fun part is that it has 2 large wings. Seems odd, but the Persians also never saw a unicorn in person. For them, like for the Greeks, it was a being that lived outside the known world. That's the reason why we're so fascinated by unicorns today. We find accounts of such creatures in the writings of Aristotle and even Julius Caesar. These famous people claimed that animals resembling unicorns lived in the forests of Germany. The modern image of a unicorn originated in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance in Europe. People back then had quite the imagination. They showed unicorns in book decorations. According to ancient scribes, this animal was ferocious. Its main enemy was the elephant. The people in medieval times thought highly of an animal they had never seen. It was quick and dangerous, so it needed to be hunted down. But how on earth do you lure a unicorn? With the help of a fair maiden, of course. This sounds strange today, but keep in mind that the Dark Ages were a peculiar period in history. Back then, doctors used leeches as legit medical treatment. The perfect setting for the myth about the unicorn. The story gets wilder. A maiden would go inside a forest. A unicorn would spot her and jump inside her lap. After it fell asleep, hunters would appear. They would then capture the unicorn and take it to the king. But why were Europeans impressed by the unicorn? Because of its horn. They believed that it had magical power. A unicorn's horn could detect poison in food and drinks. When you ground it into a powder, the horn had the power to whiten teeth. These were just some of the magical traits given to a unicorn's horn. The folklore was so strong that Europeans even had a backup for the times they couldn't get their hands on a real horn. That must have happened quite often, and they used real narwhal horns as a replacement. These are whales with a large, tusk-like tooth coming from their mouth. In England, the unicorn was a symbol of something you could never see or catch. In the 16th and 17th centuries, it became associated with imagination. That's when the rainbow came into the picture. The Victorians were the first to connect the symbol of a rainbow to the unicorn. Its first appearance in fantasy literature was in the novel Through the Looking Glass for young readers. That was the sequel to Lewis Carroll's more famous work, Alice in Wonderland. The unicorn now stood for hope and purity. Still, there were no recorded sightings of the animal in real life. At least none that could be confirmed by science. In 1663, a German scientist claimed to have found a unicorn skeleton. The story seemed too good to be true, and it was. Someone made the skeleton from the bones of various animals and tried to pass it off as a unicorn. Today, the fake skeleton is displayed in the local Natural History Museum. The people weren't gonna give up and searched for unicorns everywhere they went. In the 20th century, a British explorer discovered a new species in Africa. It had a small bump in the corner of its head. The public nicknamed the mysterious animal the African unicorn. But this wasn't true. Now we know this is an okapi. It's most closely related to a giraffe, but it looks like a zebra in the back part of its body, and its head resembles a deer. It's an impressive animal, but it's not even close to the elusive unicorn. One of the latest alleged sightings happened in 1991. An Austrian biologist reported seeing a unicorn in a forest in Germany. The legend says that these animals live in enchanted forests, but there's just one tiny issue: the total lack of physical evidence. In fact, there are historians who claim that unicorns never existed. The animal was simply a misinterpretation of cave drawings. Perhaps all those ancient images of unicorns were just two-horned animals shown from the side. It could be so. It's hard to add the third dimension to a 2D image. But then, in 2013, the unicorn reappeared. Not the animal, though the word. An American venture capitalist came up with the term to refer to startup companies with a value of over $1 billion. She chose this word because these companies are as rare as the mythical animal. There are only 1,000 of such enterprises in the whole world, and you've probably heard of the most famous one, Elon Musk's SpaceX.
Wait, don't tell me that life on Earth has bubbled for about 3.5 billion years, and the biggest creature we got is the blue whale? I mean, not bad, but that doesn't sound nearly as fun as those cool giant creatures you get to see in movies. Yeah, you recognize the iconic roar here. It appeared on TV, in comic books, in video games, and in cinema. I mean, come on. It even got its own star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame on its 50th birthday. So, what would it take to get good old Godzilla from the TV screen to our streets? And we're talking about the beast that's really gigantic. In the original film from 1954, Godzilla was thought to be 164 feet tall. This was the perfect height for the monster to just peer over the biggest buildings in Tokyo at the time. But as further movies came, Godzilla became bigger and bigger. In theory, this would be the biggest animal that could exist and not end up crushed by the gravitational field of our planet. Even if we're talking about some tiny Godzilla of, let's say, 14,000 tons. To take the gravitational force of our planet and carry such weight, Godzilla must have some incredibly strong bones. And as an object gets bigger, its volume will actually increase faster than its surface area. Okay, wait, let's start small. So, cells are the building blocks of life, and they come in all shapes and sizes. But the thing is, cells have a problem when they try to grow too big. As they grow, their surface area, the outside, doesn't keep up with their volume, which means the inside. It's like having a big mouth but a tiny stomach. You can't digest all the food you want to eat. Why haven't I learned that already? Especially when I open my fridge for a midnight snack. So, if cells get too big, they can't get enough nutrients in and waste out fast enough. It would be like living in a very big house, but with just one tiny door to go in and out. Plus, that's not their only problem. Cells also need to be able to divide and replicate, and this task gets tricky as they get bigger. They need this thing called microtubules for that. It's sort of like a skeleton that gives them structure. But don't worry, evolution is a foxy little thing. There are some cells out there, like a specific type of invasive algae, that have found ways to break the rules and get really big. And they don't even need to divide to do that. This algae could pass as an aquatic fern that has fronds up to 31 inches long. But what you're looking at is just one big cell. It has multiple nuclei, though, which are like the control centers of cells. Plus, there are even some bacteria that are living in a symbiotic relationship with the organism, which means they help each other out when necessary. It's like having a bunch of different rooms inside one big house, with some roommates living there that help around from time to time. Then there's a monster alga known as the sailor's eyeball, which is like a giant ball of green slime. It can grow up to 2 inches in diameter, but is also considered to be just a single cell. My personal favorite would be this one. Again, we're talking about a single cell, but check out its stem and cap. It looks like a tiny little umbrella. It can grow up to 4 inches tall, which is definitely not bad for a single cell. Most cells are too small to see with the naked eye, but these fellas don't hesitate to break the rules. Now, when it comes to animals getting really big, there's a limit to their size. It's like trying to build a really tall tower. Eventually, it'll become too heavy and the base won't be able to support the weight anymore. Similarly, when an animal gets really big, its bones and muscles have to evolve to support all that weight, and it becomes more and more difficult to do so. In one of the movies, Godzilla was 390 feet tall. At that size, it would be really difficult for its heart to pump blood to its brain. And if it was a reptile, Godzilla would need to spend all of its time lying in the sun to stay warm. So we'd have to hide in the shadows, hoping some bigger animals that live in warm areas could keep it full. If Godzilla was a mammal, though, it would generate too much body heat and end up cooking itself. The biggest land animals we know of were sauropods, a type of dinosaur with a really long neck and tail. They could grow up to 131 feet long and weigh up to 70 tons, which could be as heavy as 10 elephants. Evolution was pretty efficient when it had to come up with its body plan. Sauropods ate plants. They had a smart way of eating that allowed them to stay in one spot and still find enough food. They could move their long necks around to reach plants so they didn't have to walk around too much or waste too much energy. Yeah, my kind of folks. That's impressive, but let's get realistic. Not many giant animals are happy to eat salad for dinner. If you had a giant beast such as Godzilla, you can expect it to go after its prey. And that becomes too hard for its body to support all that weight and perform all the necessary activities. The largest meat-eating dinosaurs were still pretty big, but not as big as the sauropods. The biggest one we know of is a fella called Spinosaurus, which was about 50 feet long. It managed to survive by eating fish and some other creatures that lived in the water. It would be so cool to have Godzilla in real life, if you have some safe basement where it won't find you, of course. But it's not likely some animal could really get bigger than our beloved sauropod. At least, not without running into some serious physical limitations. And have you ever wondered how big a plant could get? It turns out some trees have already reached amazing heights, such as the General Sherman, the largest living tree on the planet. It's more than 275 feet tall and has nearly 53,000 cubic feet of wood. It's gigantic, but still a little bit smaller than the Lindsay Creek French tree, the biggest tree ever recorded. It was a coast redwood 390 feet tall and had a volume of more than 90,000 cubic feet, which is as big as some skyscrapers. But it ain't easy for plants to get big either. When they're tall, it's tricky for them to get water from the roots to the leaves. Redwoods have a couple of tricks up their sleeves, though. For example, they absorb moisture from fog through their leaves. Plus, they have a wide base that gives them more support. If we want to build taller buildings, we also need to think about the challenges plants face, like how to build a good base that will support the structure and transport water and nutrients. If we're not just looking for height, we can take a peek at other massive organisms on our home planet, such as Pando. This is a male aspen forest in Utah that covers 107 acres and is basically one giant organism. It weighs almost 6,000 tons and is one of the biggest organisms on Earth. Perfect salad bowl for Godzilla. I mean, plants aren't the only organisms that can grow to massive sizes. There are fungi, like the honey mushroom, that can grow into a network of tiny threads called hyphae. They tend to spread out over big areas, and it's like a pretty big underground web, connecting everything together. One specimen in Michigan covers 90 acres and weighs about 400 tons. Now that's a lot of mushrooms.
Hey, do you believe in folklore telltale signs that can help predict the weather? Actually, many of them even have a scientific backup. So let's dive in. You've probably heard this one at least once. Red sky at night, sailor's delight. Red sky in the morning, sailor's warning. Oh, you haven't? Then you might have heard a variation with the word shepherd instead of sailor. This weather lore was even commemorated by William Shakespeare, I call him Bill, back in 1593. He wrote a poem, Venus and Adonis, and there is a description of the red sky lore. Turns out Bill was right, and this one can be explained. The red sky appears when dust and small particles are trapped in the atmosphere by high pressure. When sunlight passes through the Earth's atmosphere, it splits into different colors of the spectrum and creates colorful skies. If there's a high-pressure system, it can trap dust and vapor in the atmosphere, causing blue light to scatter and leaving only red. So it can indicate that the weather will be clear and calm the next day, whereas a red sky in the morning can indicate a storm is on the way. How about another one with sailors? Rainbow in the morning gives you fair warning. Rainbow at night is a sailor's delight. Now this suggests that if you see a rainbow in the morning, it means that rain is on the way. However, if you see a rainbow at night, it means that the weather will be calm and clear the following day. And the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow is still a myth. Next one. They say no weather is ill if the wind be still. This one's pretty logical too. Calm weather conditions show us that the pressure is high in this area. Highs are regions of descending air, and they prevent bad weather phenomena, such as clouds and precipitation, from forming. But there's more to that. Actually, calm conditions may be a true sign that bad weather's on the way. We often call it the calm before the storm. Have you ever seen this halo around the sun or moon? Well, it's another telltale weather sign. Next time you spot such a halo, make sure to grab an umbrella before you leave the house. This phenomenon occurs because of refraction. The sun and moon provide light, although in different ways, and this light gets refracted by ice crystals at high altitudes. When you see a halo, it means that the moisture up there is going down. Also, these halos may evolve into another beautiful phenomenon, milk sky. The milk sky is still clear, but the typical blue shade is sort of washed away and appears a bit faded or milky. Today, we can just check the weather forecast on our iPhones. But centuries ago, people needed to have some alternatives to be able to predict the weather. The very first weather forecasts appeared around 650 BCE. Back then, the Babylonians would predict weather using cloud patterns. Ooh, that's a fluffy one. Uh-oh, there's a dark one. We should go inside. People had to wait for quite a lot of centuries for mass weather forecasting. The first prototype of what we have today appeared in 1835, and it was thanks to the invention of the electric telegraph. By the way, back in the olden days, animals contributed a lot to weather forecasting. Some traditions are preserved up to today. For instance, Groundhog Day. Long story short, if the groundhog gets out of its den on the 2nd of February in Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania, and sees its shadow, it will go back into the den, and the winter will last for 6 more weeks. On the contrary, if the groundhog does not see its shadow and doesn't get scared, spring will arrive soon this year. There's no actual scientific backup to this tradition, but surprisingly, in most cases, the groundhog predictions come true. Well, in the US, people get predictions from groundhogs. In Croatia and Serbia, people use bears to see if spring's on the way. On the 15th of February, they watch a bear awaken from winter dormancy. It's all about the shadow again. If the bear gets confused when he sees his shadow, it will go back to its den and sleep for 40 more days, thus prolonging the winter. But if it's cloudy on this day, it's a true sign that spring is coming. As to the poor schmuck who has chosen to wake the bear up, I think I'd pass on that honor. Unlike groundhogs and bears, seagulls can help predict bad weather all year round. They say, "Seagull, seagull, sit on the sand. It's never good weather when you're on the land." These birdies tend to sleep on the water, so if they sense turbulent wind, they prefer not to struggle with it but avoid it. Therefore, they just land on the beach and wait. Smart! Rain before 7, clear by 11. Pretty common, but only partly true. The occurrence of late night and early morning rains may be due to the passing of a weather front. Still, it's not 100% correct to assume that morning rain is a sign that the afternoon will be dry. In some cases, a rainstorm that develops in the late afternoon may last up until the night, causing early morning rain. Now, cows could make good weather forecast reporters too. A cow with its tail to the west makes the weather best. A cow with its tail to the east makes the weather least. Thing is, they don't really enjoy it when the wind is blowing right in their faces, so they prefer to stand with their backs to the wind. Winds blowing from the west usually bring good weather, and those blowing from the east, on the contrary, are likely to provide unsettled weather. Voila! I told you, cows are cool. So, should you ever be in a pasture with cows, you will know what weather it will be in the next few hours, even if there's no coverage and you can't use your phone. Now, in case there are no cows, bears, or any other animals that are sensitive to the weather, you can use onions. Yep, you heard that right. Even onions can predict the weather, and these guys actually predict long-term conditions. Here's a nice rhyme. Onion skins very thin, mild weather coming in. Onion skins thick and tough, coming winter cold and rough. Well, seems there's no prediction connected to French fried onion rings though. If you want to hear a scientific explanation for this, sorry, there won't be any. In fact, scientists say such rhymes have stood the test of time for one reason only, and it's our human selective memory. We tend to remember things we've predicted correctly, and if not, we just forget them. Oaks and maples can be helpful though, due to their ability to curl leaves when the humidity is very high and the wind's blowing strongly. So, when leaves turn their back, 'tis a sign it's going to rain, turns out to be quite a true saying. There's even a rhyme for it. When the leaves show their undersides, be very sure that rain betides. I know, betides, it's kind of a forced rhyme, but it is a word, it means happens. Okay, time to move on, let's not beat a dead horse, which, by the way, is not a weather predictor. So hey, did you know that you can even use your friends to predict the weather? Our human body is way more multifunctional than you could have imagined. Here's another short rhyme to prove we humans have superpowers. For instance, our body can predict rain. I know ladies by the score whose hair foretells the storm. Long before it begins to pour, their curls take a drooping form. See? I bet you've noticed it many times and maybe even correlated that our hair may act weirdly when the humidity rises. It may expand in length due to humid air, and naturally curly hair may droop. Naturally straight hair, vice versa, may even curl up a bit. If you have blonde hair, you're even more potent at rain forecasting, as it's more sensitive to humidity. On to more precise predictions. Yeah, it's cool to predict the weather, but what about predicting temperature? You can tell the temperature by counting a cricket's chirps. These guys are quite accurate thermometers. When it's warm, they chirp faster. When it's cold, their chirps get slower. Now, here's what you need to do to get the temperature. Count their chirps for 14 seconds, and then add 40 to the resulting number of chirps. Now comes the disclaimer. Crickets only work in Fahrenheit. For Celsius, you'll need to do some extra calculations. While not all weather lures are accurate all the time, they can be a fun way to predict the weather and connect with nature. Meanwhile, my hair is turning frizzy, so I'll grab an umbrella.
Once upon a time, a young boy was digging a ginormous hole on the beach. But then, disaster struck! The hole caved in, and he found himself stuck up to his neck in the sand like a human popsicle. Thankfully, his parents were able to keep the sand out of his mouth. Emergency services swooped into the beach soon after. After some effort, the boy was taken out. Experts say sand is tricky and can be super unstable when messed with. So, the moral of the story is, go ahead and have fun on the beach. But if you're planning on digging a hole big enough to fit your entire body, be mindful of the size and location. It turns out that this is not a one-time incident. Making deep holes can lead to serious injuries, or even worse. According to a study, there have been over 50 incidents of sand hole collapses worldwide, with many of them resulting in fatalities. We don't want to be the next headline for a preventable tragedy. So, here are some helpful tips from experts to keep you safe and sound. Never dig a hole deeper than the knee level of the smallest person in your group, and always fill in any hole you make before you leave, day or night. Lastly, avoid digging near the dune line or water line where emergency vehicles travel. Since we started with holes on the beach, we might as well continue with sinkholes. Sinkholes, also known as snake holes or swallow holes, are like chameleons on Earth's surface. They can be big, they can be small, and they can pop up seemingly out of nowhere. It's like playing a game of whack-a-mole, but instead of moles, it's sinkholes. These sneaky things form over the years. They require specific conditions and processes. So what's the deal with sinkholes? Well, they're basically natural depressions or holes in Earth's surface caused by karst processes. And what are karst processes, you may ask? They occur when bedrocks are soluble. It's as if rocks have a secret weakness, and water is their kryptonite. Now, even though sinkholes form slowly, they're like that one friend who's always full of surprises. They can be unpredictable and show up when you least expect them. Interesting fact time. This giant pit is over 2,165 feet deep. It's the biggest and deepest sinkhole in the world. Some researchers think a meteorite might have caused it, but others believe it formed over the course of 128,000 years as underground rivers eroded the surrounding limestone. Either way, it's pretty mind-boggling. The locals have known about it for ages, but it wasn't until 1994 that the rest of the world learned about it thanks to a group of British explorers. This massive hole is home to over 1,200 plant and animal species, including rare ones like the ginkgo tree and the clouded leopard. A waterfall cascades into the pit in the rainy season, feeding an underground river and cave system below. It's like a whole other world out there. Next, we have hailstorms. Think of them as nature's way of saying, "Heads up!" in the most intense way possible. Hail is like frozen rain on steroids, and when it starts pelting down, you better take cover. Hailstorms typically last for about 15 minutes, but in that short time, they can cause serious damage to buildings, cars, and crops. They can even knock out power lines and bring down trees. And if you're unlucky to be caught out in the open during a hailstorm, you might find yourself feeling like a human pinball. Here are some of the things that make hailstorms a real bummer. Watch out, planes. If you think turbulence is bad, wait until you encounter a hailstorm in the air. A plane crashed during a hailstorm in northern Mexico in 2018. Thankfully, everyone on board made it out safely. Phew! Hail is not just a danger to airplanes, but also to cars on the road. Imagine driving down the highway and then boom! Your windshield shatters into tiny pieces. You can barely see where you're going, and the road is slippery. Farmers have it rough during a hailstorm too. Those strong winds and giant ice pellets can destroy crops, leaving behind a trail of broken plants and stripped bark. All that hard work goes down the drain in a matter of minutes, leading to significant losses. What if it's summertime? Who doesn't love soaking up the sun, playing in the sand, and catching some waves? Oops, rip currents. Those powerful, narrow channels of fast-moving water are everywhere along the east, Gulf, and west coasts, and the Great Lakes shores. They can move at speeds of up to 8 feet per second. People who panic in rip currents often try to swim straight back to shore, which is the wrong move and could tire you out, or even worse. So, what should you do if you get caught in a rip current? First, stay calm and don't fight it. Instead, swim parallel to the shore and then back to land at an angle. A little clarification. Rip currents and rip tides are not the same thing. Rip tides are a specific type of current that happens when tidal water moves quickly through places like inlets and harbors. Landslides are another type of danger that can catch you off guard. Mountains look like they are stable, rock-solid things that have been around forever. But don't let appearances fool you. Landslides can happen anywhere, at any time. Basically, landslides happen when a big pile of dirt, rocks, and other debris gets all shaken up and starts tumbling down a hill. Sometimes it's because of rain. Sometimes it's because of something like an earthquake. And sometimes it's just because the ground decides it's had enough. Mother Nature's got some more tricks up her sleeve. First up, we've got heat bursts. This weather phenomenon is hotter than a jalapeno. Now, these aren't your everyday thunderstorms. For a heat burst to occur, the atmospheric conditions have to be very specific. We need dry air, high altitude descents, and an absence of evaporated precipitation. When all these factors come together, the result is a heat burst that can reach speeds so fast that you'll feel like you're riding a rocket to the sun. And not only is the air scorching hot, but it's also so dry that it evaporates moisture right out of anything it touches, including poor defenseless vegetation. Have you ever heard of a fire whirl, also known as a fire devil or fire tornado? It's like a swirling vortex of fire and ash that can eat up debris and combustible gases. Think of it as a mini tornado that's fueled by a raging fire. These things usually start with a swirl of wind, which you can see thanks to all the smoke. They happen when rising heat and windy conditions team up to create whirling eddies of air. These eddies can sometimes get so intense that they form a tornado-like vortex that's hungry for anything and everything in its path. Now, sometimes people call a fire whirl by its other names, like firenado, fire swirl, or fire twister. But those terms usually refer to a different thing, where a fire is so intense that it creates an actual tornado. Fire whirls are a little different because their vortex doesn't usually go from the ground all the way up to the clouds. And even if they do, they're not usually considered a classic tornado because they don't form in the same way. These things can get pretty hot too. We're talking up to 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Fire whirls are more likely to happen during wildfires or firestorms when there's enough wind to create big vortices. The biggest ones can be massive. They can even uproot trees that are 49 feet tall or more. There you have 7 sneaky natural phenomena. Have you ever encountered any of these? Comment below and let us know.
Mother Nature is caring, loving, and providing. But sometimes, she's also terrifying. These Reddit users have seen her dark and spooky side. They've been through the worst, and fortunately, they all lived to tell the tale. The question is, are you ready to face it and learn about her chilling, uncanny secrets? Now, imagine it's a beautiful Sunday, and you decide to do some gardening. You grab your tools and head outside, but once you start digging to plant some flowers, your hand touches something slippery, yet also sticky. And the worst part is, it's moving. You're shaking with fear, but find the courage to look at what it is. You become filled with a great relief, because fortunately, that's not a snake. It's an enormous earthworm. Well, we don't know why this Reddit user was digging the earth up, but that's exactly what they found. And if you take a look at the photo carefully, you'll notice that it's not the entire length of the worm. Some part of it is still underground, so it's actually even longer than it appears to be. Here are 2 fun facts about earthworms for you. The first one is they can regenerate to some degree if you cut them in 2. And in some species, you can even end up with 2 worms. And the second one is, the longest earthworm ever recorded was 21 feet in length when naturally extended. So, this guy hadn't even seen the worst. Take a look at these 2 crows standing on a fence. Do you notice that one of them is hiding a bone in its beak? Well, it's kind of spooky. In almost every gothic novel, crows and ravens are bad omens. Well, we all know this is just superstition. But it may actually have originated from the fact that crows are extremely intelligent and cunning. They can recognize individual human faces, They can gossip about you to the other crows. They use tools to solve problems, and they can plan for the future. But the most interesting thing is, they can hold grudges against people who are cruel to them, and even pass those to their offspring. The same goes for people who are kind to them as well. Once they love you, they'll be your friend for a lifetime. So, this Reddit user must have done something right to be rewarded by these crows. Now, let's take a look at the photo that the next Reddit user shared. The tiny pearl-like things you see on the kitchen window are no gemstones, they're actually eggs. But of what exactly? That we may never know, but plenty of Reddit users in the comments section say they might be moth eggs, or stink bug eggs. Either way, it seems like the person who posted the photo needs to do some thorough cleaning to get rid of them. If you're having the same kind of problem at your house, here's a tip on how to get rid of moths. Wash and scrub any areas you found larvae or eggs with a vinegar and water solution. If you have stink bugs, add dish soap to that mixture. Okay, this next photo was not originally shared on Reddit, but it's certainly worth mentioning when it comes to how scary nature can be. The photo is captured by a woman driving home in Minnesota. And let me tell you, this is not photoshopped or edited in any way. I bet it reminds you of that wave scene in Interstellar, right? One Reddit user even called the photo Cloudception. Guess all of us can agree there's some sort of Christopher Nolan movie vibe going on there. The lady who took it, on the other hand, officially named it Ocean in the Sky. Well, that fits too. One meteorologist said the photo is so rare and unique that there are clouds in it that even she herself had never seen before. So it's no wonder it went viral on social media platforms. Let's be honest, each one of us probably drew a lightning bolt on our forehead and pretended to be Harry Potter at least once in our lives. But the next photo one Reddit user shared might change the way you view lightning bolts. The truck you see there, which belongs to their coworker, got struck by lightning. But as you might have guessed, the damage was done by fire. The user says the truck burned for about 10 minutes at a super high temperature before it was put out by fire extinguishers. So, it was not instant damage. To all the comic book fans out there, this is your reminder to not attempt any lightning bolt experiments to become the Flash. This wind turbine looks so sad it's almost heartbreaking to look at, right? Well, the story behind it is upsetting indeed, but in a scary way. The Texan Reddit user who posted this photo explains that the wind turbine was hit by a tornado. But these comments might cheer you up and get your mind off of how frightening tornadoes can be. One Reddit user says the wind turbine looks like its mom told it can't go to the thing. Another one suggests that the tornado took things personally and got revenge on the wind turbine for thinking it can harness the power of the wind. And one other describes the wind turbine to look like a giant robot palm tree. What's worth mentioning here is that it's a good thing the blades of the turbine didn't snap off, because if they had, the consequences would have been much more destructive. This next one might be the weirdest yet. Those toes don't belong to a forest gnome or any other fantastical creature, even though this photo sure looks like it's out of a fairy tale. And I know you're thinking about it, so let me just clarify that it's not a zombie trying to crawl its way out of the ground either. These are actually a type of fungus that is commonly known as dead man's fingers. They can generally be found in forests or any other woodland area, usually growing from the bases of rotting or injured tree stumps and decaying wood. They're fairly common in the UK, Ireland, mainland Europe, and parts of North America. The funny thing about them is the fingers vary in appearance at different stages of their life cycle, so in that manner, it's like a real human being whose body changes as they grow older. You can probably tell by the way it looks that it's very dangerous to eat one. They're very poisonous, so good thing the Reddit user who posted this photo didn't try to get a taste of it. Even Ant-Man couldn't handle this wasp. This Reddit user woke up one day only to find one monstrous wasp in their basement. Look at that giant stinger it has! It almost seems like no beekeeping clothing would protect you from it. This species of wasp is called cicada hawks, which is due to the fact that they hunt cicadas and provision their nests with them. They can be found in the eastern and Midwest US, as well as in southern parts of Mexico and Central America. Female cicada hawks use their stings to paralyze their prey rather than to defend their nests. Unlike most other wasps and bees, they do not sting unless they're handled roughly. On the other hand, male cicada hawks only fight with other insects and cannot sting. And in case you're wondering, they're generally not aggressive towards humans swatted at. Phew! The last Reddit user we have for you today used to keep their duck eggs in the pantry. One day, they went and checked the place after hearing a lot of noise coming from there. And what they found was 2 snakes wrapped around the eggs. Well, at least the ones that the snakes didn't eat yet. But the crazy thing is, when the Reddit user got rid of them both and came back, they found another one in there. And this time, there weren't any eggs left. If only they could speak parcel tongue, things would be so much easier.
Life on a high oxygen planet would be a wild and crazy ride. Imagine taking a deep breath and feeling like you just downed a shot of espresso. The sky is a deep shade of blue, and the trees around you are gigantic, lush and green, growing at a rapid pace. Daily exercise now becomes a breeze. With all that extra oxygen, you'd be able to run faster, jump higher, and lift heavier weights. Your morning run is basically effortless, and you notice that everything seems to move faster and with more energy. But you'd also have to watch out for the wildlife. The animals around you would be simply huge, and they'd move with a heightened speed and agility. Imagine getting chased by a cheetah that's hopped up on oxygen. It'd be like running from a Ferrari with legs. But how is this even possible? And how would high levels of oxygen affect the evolution of the planet and our life in general? To answer this question, you need to understand how oxygen works. Oxygen is like the fuel that powers the engines of life. It's a gas that's all around us, making up about 21% of the air we breathe. And don't let that small percentage fool you. Every time you take a breath, these little molecules get top priority access to your body's cells and help them produce energy. Without oxygen, your cells wouldn't have the energy they need to function properly, and your body would start to shut down. Oxygen is also incredibly versatile. It's used by a wide range of organisms, from tiny bacteria to massive elephants. It's even in the ocean. Marine organisms like plankton and algae produce a ton of oxygen, keeping the underwater world thriving. And not only is it a crucial component of life on Earth, it's also a fountain of youth. Oxygen keeps our skin glowing and our minds sharp. So don't forget to walk in the fresh air more often. But that's just the beginning. Oxygen is quite a multitasker, doing a bunch of different jobs at once. For starters, it's like the janitor of the atmosphere, cleaning up all the nasty pollutants and keeping the air fresh and clean. It's also the bodyguard of our atmosphere, protecting us from harmful UV rays and other dangerous cosmic stuff. Without it, we'd be like sitting ducks in the face of space radiation. And let's not forget about the impact of oxygen on the weather. It's like the puppet master, pulling the strings of the atmosphere and creating all sorts of wacky weather patterns. Tornadoes, hurricanes, thunderstorms, they're all just a product of oxygen doing its thing. And sure, these things are incredibly dangerous, but they also help redistribute nutrients and organic matter by lifting and transporting soil, leaves, and other debris to new areas. So they low-key help fertilize soil and provide nutrients for plants and other organisms. As you can see, the little oxygen molecules are working hard to keep everything in check. So what would happen if we suddenly raise the levels up to 30, 40, even 50%? Actually, too much oxygen can become very dangerous for us. There's such a thing called oxygen toxicity. It can lead to a range of pretty bad symptoms and even the worst of outcomes. It's like eating too much candy. It might taste good at first, but you'll regret it later. It may sound surprising, but if you get too much oxygen, you'll be out of breath. You might feel great at first, but pretty soon you'll start feeling dizzy, like you've been dancing for hours without taking a break. Also, high oxygen levels can be downright toxic to your body. It can leave you feeling like you got hit by a truck. In fact, something similar happened on Earth many years ago. For example, this kind of environment existed during the Carboniferous period, when plants first began to take root on land. At that time, oxygen made up 20% of the atmosphere, about the same as today. It continued to rise over the next 50 million years, reaching levels as high as 35%. It had some pretty profound effects on the planet. Around 300 million years ago, massive forests sprang up on land and huge swamps dominated low-lying areas. But as these giant plants decayed, something strange happened. The level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere suddenly dropped. Normally, when something decays, microbes break it down and create carbon dioxide. This gas helps us to trap the sun's heat and makes the planet warmer. But when these giant plants were buried under the deep swamps, microbes couldn't do their magic. All this made our planet much cooler, in a temperature sense. Who knew that something as simple as a breath of fresh air could have such a big impact? But this period of life on Earth helped us understand what our planet would look like if the oxygen level on it was much higher. And here's what we learned. We've already talked about the initial boost of energy and the exhaustion that follows, so we might need to wear special masks or equipment to help us breathe comfortably. Such an environment could also help you heal faster. It's like having a team of tiny doctors inside your body. But the downside is that it could also make you more susceptible to certain diseases and illnesses. So we're maintaining a balance then, I guess. And with all that oxygen, we'd have some pretty spectacular sunsets and sunrises to enjoy. The extra oxygen in the atmosphere would scatter light in new and interesting ways, creating breathtaking displays of color in the sky. And it's not just humans that would be affected. Plants and animals can also experience some wacky effects. Plants might grow like they're on steroids, reaching towering heights, like the beanstalk from that fairy tale. Imagine how much food we'd be able to harvest. Giant trees and crops could provide us with more sustenance than we've ever had. And animals might experience some crazy mutations. The oxygen-loving species, like insects and arachnids, would be the winners of this situation. They would simply thrive in such a world, growing bigger and stronger than ever before. So if you've ever been terrified of a giant spider that you found in the house, just imagine what it would be like if it were 5 times bigger. But for species that have adapted to lower oxygen levels, things don't look that great. Mammals, for example, would have a pretty tough time. This could lead to a shift in the balance of power among different species, with some thriving and others struggling to survive. Overall, we could see some seriously cool adaptations, like birds developing the ability to fly higher than ever before. Dealing with huge animals could be both exciting and challenging. We'd probably have to build stronger shelters and try to stay out of their way. All this could also lead to increased natural disasters, as well as damage to ecosystems and wildlife. Fires would ignite quickly and burn fiercely, making wildfires a constant threat. Even a simple spark from a campfire could potentially lead to disaster. We might need to rethink our cooking and heating methods to avoid any accidents. By the way, if we lived on a planet with less oxygen, say about 15%, we would also have a hard time. For example, our bodies would have to work much harder to obtain the same amount of oxygen as they do on Earth. We would probably experience fatigue and shortness of breath much more quickly. and physical exercise would be much more challenging. We could have some problems with memory and concentration. So the amount of oxygen we have now is the most ideal. Let's appreciate it. As you can see, living on such a planet would be a real roller coaster. It would require some serious caution. But as long as we were careful, we'd be able to enjoy the benefits of all that extra oxygen in the air. Just be prepared for some wild and wacky effects along the way.
So, does the mysterious Devil's Gardens in the Amazon rainforest ring any bells? Don't worry, it's not some spooky phenomenon. It's the work of some tiny but mighty insects called the lemon ants. These ants inject a natural herbicide, formic acid, into any other plant that is not the tree species that they call home. By doing this, they create a space for their treehouse saplings to grow, allowing the ant colony to expand as it occupies new nesting sites in the saplings. That's some efficient gardening, if you ask me. But don't be fooled. These devil gardens are not just a bunch of boring old trees. In fact, they are botanical anomalies that grow very slowly every year, and some of them are over 800 years old. Who knew ants could create such impressive and long-lasting structures? Of course, the rainforest is still one of the most diverse ecosystems on Earth, with a remarkable diversity of plant life. But it's fascinating to see the control ants can have over their environment, creating single-species structures in such a complex ecosystem. But where does the name Devil's Garden come from? We know ants are to blame, but is there something else hiding in the Amazon rainforest? Well, picture this. You're strolling along, taking in the lush foliage, when suddenly you stumble upon a clearing. But wait, there's something strange about this patch of land. There's no vegetation, just a handful of trees standing alone in the dirt. What's going on here? It's easy to understand why people came up with this name after seeing the weird stretch of vegetation. And as humans do, they came up with quite an impressive legend to back up the story. It was said that the inhabitant of this eerie oasis was a shape-shifting evil spirit, like me. Just kidding. This little guy may have looked like a misshapen person walking on one hoof and one human foot. But don't be fooled. He supposedly had a whole bag of tricks up his sleeve, including the ability to transform into someone you know and lead you down the path to doom. Hey, it's just a myth, but you have to admit it was quite convincing, right? Clever landscaping ants aside, there are a lot of unsolved mysteries hidden in the Amazon rainforest, like its unusual geoglyphs, for example. Humans have been getting creative with the Earth's surface for ages. Geoglyphs are just one of the many ways we've left our mark on this planet. Basically, we take some sand or stones, move them around a bit, and voila! We've got ourselves a funky design that pops against the backdrop of the ground. A new study found that the area was home to up to 1 million people before Columbus first arrived in the New World back in 1492. That's a lot of people, and they left behind some pretty cool stuff. The Amazon rainforest is already amazing, with 1 in 10 known species in the world living there, and 1 in 5 of Earth's birds. But did you know that over the past few decades, archaeologists have discovered evidence of numerous large complex societies that may have inhabited Amazonia? It turns out that the Amazon rainforest was not just a pristine wilderness, but a hub of human activity as well. These South American geoglyphs are particularly interesting. They're these huge structures that combine square, circular, and hexagonal shapes. Archaeologists have found very few remains of habitation inside the enclosures, which suggests they were not settlements. Instead, the most likely explanation is that they were used for ceremonial gatherings. The exact function of these structures is still a mystery, though. To find out how widespread human settlements were in the Amazon, scientists focus on the basin of the upper reaches of the Tapias River, a major tributary of the Amazon. Using satellite images, they discovered 81 new archaeological sites in the upper Tapias Basin, with a total of 104 earthworks. That means there is no gap in the network of earthworks spanning across Amazonia's southern rim. When researchers conducted ground surveys of 24 of these sites, they found evidence that the sites they visited were once inhabited. These sites dated from 1250 to 1500 CE and range from about 100 to 1300 feet wide. The largest were typically hexagonal fortified settlements, suggesting a certain degree of planning and uniformity in their construction. Based on the size and distributions of the earthworks, the researchers suggested that similar settlements may have extended over about 154,000 square miles of the southern rim of the Amazon, supporting a population of between 500,000 and 1 million people in late pre-Columbian times. Of course, the new study doesn't mean the Amazon rainforest was ever a teeming megalopolis. It's still mostly uncharted, so we have no idea how pre-Columbian populations were distributed across Amazonia. But it's exciting to learn about these ancient societies and the cool things they left behind. The scientists plan to do more excavations in the Upper Tapios Basin to refine their understanding of the cultural developments there. Who knows what they'll find next? Maybe a lost city full of treasure and adventure. Also hidden in the vast habitat of the Amazon is this next quirky creature. Ever heard of the Amazon pink river dolphins? Unfortunately, there is still so much we don't know about them. First things first though, let's talk about what they look like. So picture this, a small, light-colored dolphin with a pink nose and lips. They're the Barbie of dolphins. Aside from that, they look like regular dolphins with plump bodies, bulbous foreheads, skinny snouts, chubby cheeks, and small eyes. They can be found in countries like Bolivia, Brazil, Colombia, and Peru. They're also the only species of river dolphin found in the Amazon River. Unfortunately, these little guys are officially critically endangered species, so there are not many specimens available that scientists can study. No other name is more famous when it comes to exploring the Amazon rainforest than that of Percy Fawcett. He dedicated his life to exploring the area in search of a lost city. And not just any city, but an ancient, mysterious city that he called Z. Sounds like something straight out of an Indiana Jones movie, right? Percy was born in England in 1867 and had quite a career before he started exploring. But he didn't let his profession hold him back from following his dreams of exploring South America. In fact, he made 7 expeditions to the Amazon between 1906 and 1924, each time getting closer to uncovering the secrets of Z. Now, let me tell you a little bit about how large the Amazon rainforest is. How big is it? I asked myself. It's so big that you could fit the whole of the UK and Ireland into it a whopping 17 times. That's a lot of trees and animals to navigate through. But Percy was up for the challenge. Despite his best efforts, Percy never found the lost city of Z, and sadly, he disappeared during his final expedition in 1925. But his legacy lived on through the years, inspiring many to become archaeologists and explorers themselves. In fact, a book called The Lost City of Z was written about Percy's adventures and was even made into a movie. It's not all hidden mysteries and wild nature out there. There are around 1 million indigenous folks living their best lives in the Amazon rainforest. That's right, they hunt, fish, farm, and even have access to Western medicine and education. But here's the kicker. Not all of these folks are keen on socializing with outsiders, and can you blame them? For years, loggers, miners, and ranchers have been, shall we say, behaving badly toward these communities. It's no wonder that some tribes have chosen to stay isolated and protect themselves from the dangers of the outside world. In fact, in 2018, Brazilian authorities were able to snap a photo of a man dubbed the Indigenous Man in the Hole. He's the last remaining member of his tribe. But don't feel too bad for him. He's doing just fine on his own and has made it pretty clear that he's not interested in outside visitors. The authorities still leave him some seeds and tools though, so it's not all bad news.
Before we get into the reason why and how there are pyramids all around the world, let's talk about some of the examples. I'll start with the Pyramid of the Sun in Mexico. These folks really knew how to build a city. Their well-planned urban center spanned over 7 square miles and boasted several pyramids. but the Pyramid of the Sun is the most impressive. This giant pyramid was built way back in 100 CE and is one of the biggest structures of its kind in the whole Western Hemisphere. It's so big that it's 216 feet high above the ground. If you ever find yourself in this ancient city, you won't be able to miss the Pyramid of the Sun. It's right there on the east side of the Avenue of the Dead, the city's main north-south street. To build this incredible pyramid, around 1 million cubic yards of material were used, including a special kind of red volcanic rock called hued tizontal. Impressive, huh? We don't know too much about the people who built the Pyramid of the Sun or its purpose. But archaeologists believe there was once a temple on top of it. When explorers went below the pyramid in the 1970s, they found a bunch of cool tunnels and chambers. In 2011, they even found a secret stash of clay pots, obsidian pieces, animal bones, human figurines, and a mask. Who knows what other secrets the pyramid is hiding? If you decide to see this one, you must climb the pyramid using the 248 uneven steps on the west side. Watch your step. Sudan got some pyramids too. Nubian pyramids aren't as big as the ones in Egypt, but they still got around 200 of them. These ancient pyramids have been home to the tombs of the pharaohs of the Meroitic Kingdom for almost 1,000 years, who ruled Egypt from Nubia to the Mediterranean Sea. The pyramids at Meroe were constructed using granite and reddish sandstone. Oh, and did you know that Sudan has more ancient pyramids than Egypt? The Kushite pyramids depict the indigenous architecture and burial traditions of Nubia's Napata and Meroe kingdoms, which ancient Egypt influenced. Meroe, the burial site of over 40 queens and kings, is the most extensive Nubian pyramid site. The tomb walls depict mummified royals bedecked in jewelry, their wooden caskets containing bows, quivers of arrows, and other artifacts pointing to the Meroitic relationship and trade with Egyptian and Greek civilizations. So if you're looking for some ancient tombs to explore, you may consider skipping the crowds in Egypt and heading on down to Sudan. Let's fly to Iraq to see some more pyramids. Ziggurats have fancy receding layers and tiered temples. Instead of a smooth exterior, it has tiers like a cake. Perfect for all the important work and rituals that went on inside. You can find these towering structures scattered throughout Iraq and Iran, and they're a real testament to the power and skills of the people who built them. One of the biggest and most impressive ziggurats is the ziggurat at Ur. It's basically a giant rectangular pyramid that stands a whopping 70 to 100 feet tall, with 3 levels of terraces and a temple on top. Can you imagine how many baked bricks it took to build that thing? Try 720,000 for just the lower portion. This particular ziggurat was built for Sumerian king Ur-Nammu. Similar to other ones, this pyramid has been around for thousands of years, so it got a little rough around the edges. Thankfully, the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar II and some archaeologists came to the rescue in the 6th and 20th centuries respectively. And now, you can find this near Talil Air Base. The ziggurat at Ur was built in 2100 BCE by King Ur-Nammu for the moon deity Nana. It was the tallest building in the city, and you could see it from miles around. It was like the medieval cathedral spire of its day. People would come here to bring their agricultural surplus and get their food allotments and seek spiritual nourishment. Sadly, the Nana temple at the top of the ziggurat didn't survive, but we do have some blue glazed bricks that may have been part of its decoration. The lower parts of the ziggurat are pretty amazing though. The architects even included holes in the temple's baked exterior to let the water evaporate from its core. Since we explored some of the pyramids on our planet, let's take a broader perspective. They can be found in many parts of the world, Egypt has over 100 pyramids, double that number in Sudan. And dozens of others are scattered in the Middle East and China. The Americas have the most pyramids in total, with more pyramids than the rest of the world combined. These pyramids are located in Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. Time to know more about the evolution of pyramids through history. The oldest pyramid is in Egypt. This pyramid was a step pyramid, which was created by placing one layer of stone on top of another. The pharaoh Sneferu is credited with creating the pyramid shape we recognize today. During his 45-year reign, he built 3 pyramids. His first 2 attempts failed, but he finally got it right with the Red Pyramid, which is considered the first true pyramid. It was Sneferu's son, Khufu, who built the Great Pyramid of Giza, which was the tallest human-made structure on Earth for almost 4,000 years. Latin American pyramids are similar to early Egyptian step pyramids, but they were built independently, with no knowledge of each other. The pyramids in Sudan were built around 700 BCE and are tall but much narrower than those in Egypt. How in the world did all these civilizations build these things without even texting each other? After all, the Aztecs, Mayans, and ancient Egyptians were about as different as possible. But despite their cultural differences, they all seem to agree on one thing: pyramids were pretty cool. Step pyramids are all around the world because they were the most feasible and stable way to build large and tall structures without access to lighter building materials like wood and metal. The triangular form with a square base is the best way to build a sturdy structure, and having a cube structure would require more material for less height. Now, when it comes to pyramid design, the Egyptian pyramids were like giant triangles with a square base, smooth sides, and a pointy top. On the other hand, the Aztecs and Mayans went for a tiered cake look, with steps leading up to a flat platform on top. So, while all these pyramids share the same basic shape, they have their own unique flair. Each group built its pyramids using different materials, techniques, and slope angles. So while they may have been inspired by each other's work occasionally, they were just doing their own thing. Egyptian pyramids had smooth, angled sides that were designed to help the pharaoh's soul ascend to heaven. The Pyramid of the Sun was built over a series of caves that served as a passageway for the deities. The Maya built the temple of Kukulkan in Chichen Itza to honor the deity Kukulkan, usually represented by a serpent. Nicknamed El Castillo, it has 91 steps on each side, plus a platform. That's 365 steps, one for each day of the Mayan calendar. Tell me, Brightsiders, how were pyramids built? To begin with, humans made them, not a foreign race from space that landed on Earth. You see, one thing that all pyramids have in common is that they were built without advanced tools or even the wheel. It took a lot of people to build them, including skilled laborers and architects. For example, it's estimated that 20,000 people built the Great Pyramid of Giza, and it's believed that most of them were skilled laborers. Building pyramids was a massive undertaking that required years of planning and effort. The Great Pyramid at Cholula, Mexico, took 600 years to complete.
So, you've just finished your sightseeing tour of Edinburgh, Scotland, or Scotland. It lasted just under an hour, and you're hungry for more. You ask your guide if there's anything else to see, and they start talking about a mysterious underground city. You ask how long it takes to get there, and you're shocked by the guide's answer. You're standing on it. It's right under your feet. South Bridge? But you were just there and didn't notice a giant arrow pointing down. So this is where the mystery starts. The story begins in the mid-1700s. The Scottish capital wasn't as big as it is today. Only 60,000 people lived around Edinburgh Castle. All of them were packed inside medieval walls, and they say today's cities are overpopulated. Get a load of the living conditions back then. The buildings were tall, so there was little natural light. Some houses had 14 stories. Cows walked the narrow winding streets, and livestock. Things were so bad that the famous English writer Daniel Defoe noted, "I believe that in no city in the world so many people have so little room." Yep, that's the guy who wrote Robinson Crusoe. Well, something just had to be done. The solution was to build 2 long bridges to the north and to the south of the city. The names they gave the bridges were more descriptive than colorful. The bridge to the north was completed first. In 1785, construction on the second bridge got underway. It was going to connect the main pedestrian street in the north with the university buildings in the south of Edinburgh. But don't think of this construction as a modern bridge over a river. It was more of a viaduct, a type of bridge that connects 2 hills across a valley. The word viaduct comes from Latin, as Romans were pioneers in building these structures. Their capital was built on 7 hills. And just to be copycats, Edinburgh also straddled 7 major hills. Only 2 are visible today because the city has been built up. Now, back in the 18th century, the construction of the South Bridge was a remarkable feat of engineering. It took the builders only 3 years to complete it. 19 stone arches spanned a chasm that was 31 feet at its deepest point, and the length over 1,000 feet. Impressive, even for today's standards. But what does a 2.5 centuries old viaduct have to do with an underground city? Well, it is the city. You see, they designed Southbridge to be hollow on the inside. As you walk along this street today, there is actually a huge human-made cave beneath your feet. The popular name for this set of chambers is the Edinburgh Vaults. But what was the purpose of this space? And is there something or someone there now? Well, let's take it one step at a time. The builder's original intention was for these vaults to serve as merchant shops. At first, it worked out fine. Merchants used a total of 120 vaults as shops and warehouses. There were workshops, cobblers, and taverns. But as time went by, a major design flaw came to light. The stone was leaking, and the vaults were damp all the time. There was even flooding. The builders forgot to waterproof the structure. The merchants feared the water would damage their precious goods. After just a couple of years, the first tenants started moving out. Once legal trade moved away from the vaults, the city's poor moved in. And not only them, but all sorts of shady characters. Historians don't know much about this period, since there are no written records. But even the squatters had to leave soon. If you couldn't do business in these vaults, how could you live in them? It was damp and cold, and there was no ventilation, sanitation, or natural light. It really stunk. Every real estate agent's worst nightmare. Just 30 years after their completion, the Southbridge vaults were abandoned once and for all. But at a street level, business was as usual. The officials decided to fill the vaults with rubble for security purposes. Buried and forgotten, the memory of a once teeming merchant quarter of Edinburgh slowly faded from people's minds. Now, this is where the story gets a bit weird. During the 1980s, a Scottish rugby player accidentally found a tunnel leading into the vaults. The athlete didn't waste any time and started excavating the vaults with the help of his son. Several tons of rubble, and a decade later, the Southbridge vaults have been restored to their former glory, so to speak. They were again dark and damp as they were back in the 1700s. There were many interesting finds in this underground city. The vaults were littered with oyster shells, which were the standard diet for a working-class resident of Edinburgh at the time. Other finds, such as shoes and empty bottles, suggested that people actually lived in these claustrophobic vaults. Think of this the next time you see someone trying to rent their garage as an apartment. So, your guide was right. There really is a hidden city under the streets of Edinburgh. Well, at least one street. You have now gone down from the main pedestrian street into Cowgate. You look up and there it is, the only visible arch of the once impressive bridge. You are now searching online to book a tour of the vaults. You just have to see this place with your own eyes. But the Scottish capital isn't the only city with a mysterious underground. The historic region of Cappadocia in central Turkey hides no less than 36 cities beneath the ground. The biggest and the most impressive one wasn't discovered until 1963. It was built during the Byzantine era to protect the local population from invaders. We have similar structures made out of concrete in our cities, but the level of the Turkish underground city is really impressive. There are several levels, like in a multi-story car garage. The caves and tunnels lie 197 feet underground. That's 2/3 of the Statue of Liberty's height. The city could house 20,000 people at any given time, complete with livestock and food. The smell. Anyway, 20,000 is the average attendance at Major League Soccer matches today. You might want to add a field trip to one of these places the next time you go to Turkey. Most of these cities in Cappadocia can be found in rural areas. Makes sense, right? After all, they were dug out as hiding places. But in Europe, there is one city whose underground labyrinth resembles the vaults of Edinburgh. You've probably heard of Pilsen in the Czech Republic. But hold on a second, this isn't going to be a story of the most famous local product. Something brewed, perhaps? It's the story of a medieval city that survived underneath the streets of Pilsen. Water wells, cellars, and passageways stretch for more than 12 miles. Merchants and craftspeople used Pilsen's historical underground for storage. Water, food, ice, you name it. The waterworks are pretty impressive. Historians estimate that 360 wells are located under Pilsen's historical town center. In times of instability, the passageways served as safe havens for the locals. They definitely didn't go thirsty down there. Today, most tourists visit these mysterious underground cities. But in Canada, there's one where people live and work. The construction of Montreal's underground city began in 1962. The initial idea was to shelter traffic. That's a nice way to say that city officials were building a metro station. The idea caught on, and the project expanded. Now, it's a real-life urban maze hidden under the downtown area. Need a place to stay? There are hotels down there. Want to grab a bite? Step into one of the underground restaurants. Multiple shops, a library, cinemas, the list is long. There are even residential complexes. But how can people live under the ground? Simple. Although the city itself lies beneath the earth, the access points are at ground level. You can enter the 20-mile-long tunnel network at more than 120 places. Oh, that's another place down under. Oops, sorry, Australia. Secant cosine tangent sine 3.14159. Yeah, that was the cheer we heard coming from the trigonometry club back in the day. For the rest of us in math class, terms such as sine, tangent, and pi were just bewildering. Who invented these and why? Was their only purpose to make it harder for students? Well, not quite. Trigonometry was invented by the ancient Egyptians. They needed this knowledge to construct pyramids, and they did a pretty good job too. The Great Pyramid in Giza still stands today, some 4,500 years after it was built. No recalls either. So let's get out of that classroom and on a journey through time to reveal the secrets behind the ancient Egyptians' precision. Here you are, standing on the Great Pyramid's construction site, some 9 miles from Cairo. Well, the city still isn't there, as you're surrounded only by the desert and teams of construction workers. They're transporting large stone blocks weighing 2.5 tons each. They're inside a wooden sled that sits on large rollers. A crew of 8 men rolls these blocks along the ground. You immediately think of the rollers on a supermarket cash register. The principle is exactly the same, but the scale is greater, much greater. Scientists estimate that the Egyptians used 2.3 million such blocks in the Great Pyramid alone. And the block in front of you is one of the lighter ones. The heaviest of them weighed up to 15 tons. But where did all these blocks come from? Most of them originated from quarries around Giza. It's not that impressive, you think, but wait until you hear how ancient engineers transported the granite used in construction over 500 miles to the pyramid. There were no railways or highways back then, but the mighty Nile was always there. Researchers even believe that the Egyptians dug a canal to connect the Nile directly to the pyramid's construction site. All they had to do then was to wait for the flood season to begin, and voila! The rising water levels floated the heavy stone blocks for them. But how did they lift the enormous stones on dry land to stack them up to the top? Did they use oversized cranes? Well, ancient Egyptians worked around this problem, literally speaking. One of the workers is now pointing to the giant ramp going around the pyramid they're building. This is how a mountain road zigzags its way to the top. If the ramp went directly to the top of the pyramid, then workers couldn't pull the stone blocks along it. It would be too steep. Scientists have calculated that 8% could be the maximum incline. So ancient Egyptians just extended the ramp around the pyramid. Again, these are all theories, as the ramp could have been inside the pyramid, as some researchers suggest. The exact building method is still a mystery, guarded by the Sphinx. That's its real name, right? Wrong. As the Great Sphinx is just the statue's alias. You know, the name writers take when they want to hide their true identity, or a singer's stage name. The Sphinx's real name, translated from Egyptian, means Horus in the horizon. That was the name for the Egyptian deity of the sky. The trail of mystery doesn't end there. As a man walks past you with a bucket of paint, he's going to add a touch of color to the Great Sphinx. Researchers found specks of this red color next to its ear. That was some strong paint, as it survived for thousands of years. You are now standing straight in front of the Sphinx. You look up. It's very tall, right? 66 feet to be precise. Now resist the urge to take a selfie. You can do it. Now you notice something else. It looks like the Sphinx is in the center of a giant triangle in the back. That's one side of the Great Pyramid. And no, your eyes are not playing tricks on you. The Sphinx really does sit in the center of the pyramid's lateral face. Here's where math comes in handy. A pyramid has 4 sides, called lateral faces. There's also a 5th face, the base, but that's not visible. It's, wait for it, face down. The Sphinx has one last mystery to reveal: its age. Scientists agree that Pharaoh Khafre built the Sphinx. He ruled after his father, who had built a great pyramid nearby. So both structures were finished around the same time. Let's talk about numbers again. You've heard of Cleopatra, the Egyptian princess described as a woman of great beauty.
Hello?
She saw the pyramids, but she lived closer to the time of the first iPhone than the time of the people who built the pyramids. Fascinating, right? You can see thousands of people around you. They're working hard to build the pharaoh's tomb. But how many of them are there exactly? One Greek philosopher estimated there were as many as 100,000 workers. Seems like an okay number for such an enormous structure, but it can't be true. Science simply can't back up this number. Egyptologists put the total number of workers at 30,000. And yes, Indiana Jones was one of them, at least on the big screen, but he showed up late. Egyptologists know a lot about the pyramids, but not everything. Not because they don't want to, but because they haven't yet dug up enough evidence. They can only guess how the building process went. First, engineers would arrive to choose the right spot and do the necessary measurements. That's why they needed all that complicated math. Then, it's time for sourcing the material, the large stone blocks I mentioned earlier. When boats deliver them to the site of the future pyramid, workers can finally do their thing. They operated in smaller groups, but there were at least 2,000 of them chiseling and carving away at any given time. Sounds like a typical construction site today? Well, that's because it is, just thousands of years ago. It's amazing what ancient Egyptians were able to achieve with just copper and stone tools. The pyramid is now complete in front of you. But is it the same pyramid we see today? Why is this structure shining bright in the desert sun? Isn't it supposed to be a dusty yellow color? Well, no. Human activity and the elements have completely stripped the outer layer of stones over time. Expert craftspeople polished these blocks using nothing but stone and sand. The end result was a smooth and shiny rock. On the day it was completed, the Great Pyramid of Giza was a perfect triangle of light. Its polished sides acted like giant mirrors, reflecting the powerful Egyptian sun. This is the point where you should put your glasses on, and that shiny thing you see at the pyramid's very top is actually gold. The capstone at the top of the pyramid is called a pyramidion. It was covered in sheets of gold. As you can guess, these were the first stones to disappear. Let's make another stop before we get you back to your classroom. We travel to the British Isles, and no, Stonehenge isn't our destination. It is Newgrange in County Meath. Scientists estimate that the ancient peoples of Ireland built this stone monument around the year 3200 BCE. This makes it older than both Stonehenge and the Great Pyramid in Giza. The function of the circular mound in Newgrange is the same as the one of the Great Pyramid and equally mysterious. The estimated amount of loose stone present in the valley is over 220,000 tons. And it's not just randomly thrown on a pile. The order in which the stones are set makes the structure water-resistant. That would explain how Newgrange had survived for so long. Kinda makes you want to splash out the cash for that waterproof phone case, huh? Well, you're back in your school desk, but today's math lecture is the last thing on your mind. You're thinking about how great the Egyptian pyramids are, and if we have something similar today. It turns out modern engineers are just as impressed with the Great Pyramid as you are. There's a glass pyramid sitting in the main courtyard of the famous Louvre Museum in Paris. The panorama of San Francisco wouldn't be complete without the 48-story Transamerica Pyramid. But Las Vegas went the furthest. There we find the Luxor Hotel. It's so big that it's the third largest pyramid on the planet. And guess what's in front of it? Yup, a replica of the Sphinx. It's 110 feet tall, 2 stories higher than the one in Giza. Yeah, everything's bigger in Vegas. However crazy it might sound, you can actually buy an entire town. These places once had life in them. Over the years, they became abandoned. Forgotten towns are creepy, I admit, but they also look cool. There are thousands of ghost towns for sale in the US alone. Their condition varies. Some still have a few people living there. Others have been deserted for decades. The idea of owning a town sounds great, especially after hearing the shockingly reasonable prices. But in practice, it's not a piece of cake. As you can guess, buying a town is a little different than buying a house. Towns are considered unincorporated. That means they aren't part of a local government. So, good luck getting a loan from a bank. To buy a regular house, you can get a mortgage. But for a $200,000 ghost town, banks won't decide in your favor. Still, the fact that you can buy a town is exciting. Let's say you have the money and you'll go for it. You should consider that many of these places lack amenities, like no running water, electricity, or other basic things. Plus, there's the safety issue. Many structures in ghost towns had been constructed before the times when safety codes were invented. For example, in Utah, a town is on sale for $199,000. Yes, the buildings in this ghost town aren't in good condition, but it has a future. The new owner can turn it into a tourist spot. What if the town was haunted and some paranormal activities occurred there, which made its inhabitants leave? There are many stories about ghost towns. Potential buyers have to keep looking for the best price. It can drop to as low as $70,000. A town named Swansea in California was sold for this price in 2013. Why are these towns for sale? The reasons vary. For example, companies in Canada would build places for their employees working in gold or silver mines and their families. Sometimes these types of mining towns had over 5,000 inhabitants. Eventually, natural resources would run out and residents would move to other places. Years later, such towns would show up in real estate listings. Sweat in South Dakota is a famous ghost town for sale. The buyer will get not only the land and houses, but also a tavern, a gas station, and a local store. Now, let's take a closer look at these places that can spark your interest. Arezzo is a village in Italy. Barbara Farisi's family began buying houses in this town around 30 years ago. Over time, they've united all 18 houses into one connected structure. It's a maze of bedrooms, kitchens, hidden stairways, and more. The structure is historical, so when they needed to renovate some parts, they used materials such as old stone and wood to preserve the historical nature of the complex. When they first started buying the place, only 2 elderly people were living in the area. Now, the whole village belongs to Verace and her family. The houses have wells, old ceilings, and original floors from centuries ago. They've even converted an old wooden barn into a banquet hall and stone stables into a lounge. Here's a glimpse of what a ghost Spanish village on sale looks like. Scenic landscapes, some history, and development opportunities are mixed together in this rural town with a name I can't pronounce. This one has 3 historic rustic stone residences constructed a century ago. Unfortunately, they aren't in good shape, so a lot of work is needed to bring them back to their glorious days. Yet this effort will be worth it because they offer plenty of space. The biggest house is larger than 3,000 square feet. The second one is almost as big as the first one, and the last one is around half their size. I feel like this town has some potential to turn into boutique holiday home rentals. I mean, the place has character. It has 2 century-old granaries, a fountain, and a stone oven. The area is surrounded by rolling fields, lush woodlands, and flat plains. Plus, the village is around 15 miles away from mesmerizing coastal towns and famous attractions. Now, do I sound like I'm promoting the place? Nah, I just like it. Maybe you want to buy a town so you can be a mayor. I respect that too. Would you prefer this one that looks frozen in time? Pierce is in Arizona. It was built by a man named John James Pierce. He arrived there and mined gold nearby. It was so casual. Imagine tending your cattle, lifting up rocks from the ground, and finding gold. This is what happened to him. His life changed overnight. The news about the gold spread at the speed of light. Well, almost. This led to the construction of the town. When the calendar showed 1895, the town was officially founded. In no time, Pierce became one of the richest gold mines in Arizona. Naturally, the town flourished and grew to accommodate the newcomers. There was a blacksmith, restaurants, and a butcher. You could also find a livery, hotels, saloons, and even an attorney's office there. All of these are included in the sales price. You can also get what's inside the general store, which is now over 125 years old. You will probably manage to sell the antiquities you'll find there and cover some of the fees. So how did this town turn into an abandoned place? Well, by 1927, mining at Pierce had lost its popularity. Then the mine was finally closed down in the 1940s. Today, the site is looking for its new owner. Next up, we have Wild West Town, and yes, this is its real name. It's in Colorado, and as the name suggested, it offers a unique Wild West setup. It's not just the amenities and the vibe that makes this town special. This town was actually in use on and off for years. Since it wasn't abandoned for many years, the conditions there are pretty good compared to other towns on my list. Now it's on sale again, hoping to find the next owner. This property is located on Blair Street at the base of the San Juan Mountains. In the past, this area was frequented by miners looking for late-night refreshments and activities. The square used to have a saloon, hotel, general store, post office, and jail. Today, well-preserved historic buildings house various artisan businesses. The property includes 2 operating commercial buildings, 3 rental spaces, and 1 storage building. One of the buildings now operates as an old-school photography studio. There's also a 2-bedroom residential unit above the Emporium gift shop, built in 2005, which is currently used as a vacation rental. The property also features the original 1875 San Juan County Courthouse and the Swanee's Old Mine Sluice, where tourists can try their luck at panning for gold and gems. There are so many examples to mention, like this small medieval hamlet named Saraval. It's located between 2 Italian cities, Modena and Bologna. The village is from the 9th century. You get a castle there, literally a 3-story 18th century stately home. What else? A woodshed, a 4-floor lookout tower that was built in the 1220s, and a majestic park. I should mention that there are even deals on websites like Craigslist or eBay for potential town buyers. There's an important point here that you should pay attention to. You should check the fine print before you make the purchase. Sometimes a village or town needs an influx of cash. In this case, the deal and the ownership you will get will be purely ceremonial. Think of it like receiving the key to the city. The best you will get out of this deal can be a nice plaque or a monument in the town square as a thank you gift. Kinda interesting, huh? Maybe your new pastime activity will be looking for ghost towns for sale even though you're not going to buy one. One day, you're walking down the street wearing a mask connected to an oxygen tank. There are no clouds in the sky. There have been no clouds anywhere in the world for several months. You notice a girl who is having trouble breathing. You let her borrow your mask so that she can breathe. Then someone screams, "Take cover!" Now there's a loud whistle, and you see some kind of invisible force tearing trees out of the ground and pushing away parked cars. You hide in the nearest house. A strong icy wind sweeps past. All the strange changes in this world are caused by the atmosphere that is turned upside down. So, to understand what would happen if Earth's atmosphere changed so dramatically, we must first understand what an atmosphere is. In simple words, this is a blanket of air covering our planet. It warms us, protects us, and allows us to breathe. The atmosphere has 5 main layers: troposphere, stratosphere, mesosphere, thermosphere, and exosphere. The troposphere is the heaviest. About 80% of the total mass of the atmosphere is here. Clouds, dust, and water particles fly in this first layer. It's filled with more oxygen than the other layers and exerts the strongest atmospheric pressure on us. The fact is that all the air around us has weight. At ground level, it's roughly 15 pounds per square inch. It envelops all material objects, but we don't feel 15 pounds per square inch, or psi, because our internal pressure is equal to that. The air is dispersed in the atmosphere and on the ground. The higher we go, the lower the atmospheric pressure and oxygen levels are. For example, climbers, while ascending a high mountain, use oxygen tanks to help their bodies adapt to the changes in the air. There's artificial pressure inside airplanes to make people feel comfortable during takeoff, landing, and the entire flight. So, the most saturated and, at the same time, the heaviest air is in the first layer. But in an inverted atmosphere, it would be the farthest one from us. The next layer is the stratosphere, and it performs the function of a shield. The stratosphere consists of ozone, which absorbs most of the solar radiation and prevents it from reaching the ground. In simple words, the sun's rays are filtered through the stratosphere. They lose their harmful properties, and our planet receives safe heat. Then the mesosphere comes. You can experience the lowest temperatures in the world in this layer. Atmospheric pressure is low here, but the air is dense enough to burn meteorites passing through the mesosphere. The thermosphere follows the mesosphere. It takes a hot blow from the sun's rays. The temperature here is about 3,600 degrees Fahrenheit, almost 1.5 times higher than in a volcano. And the final layer is the exosphere. This is the last frontier of our atmosphere before open space begins. The pressure here is so weak that gas molecules escape and head toward faraway stars. So here's how everything works in an ordinary atmosphere. The sun's rays shine on the exosphere, where almost nothing happens. Then they heat the thermosphere and pass through the cold mesosphere. Sunlight cools down while filtering through the ozone layer in the stratosphere. After that, its rays pass through the heaviest and densest layer of the troposphere and reaches the ground. And now, let's see how all this would work in an inverted atmosphere. The troposphere, with all the clouds, water, and oxygen, would rise to the top. The sun's rays would burn all the moisture. Clouds would disappear from the sky. Then the sun's rays would cool slightly while passing through the ozone layer. The stratosphere would absorb all the radiation. Then the rays would pass through the cold mesosphere and quickly reach the surface of our planet. The thermosphere and exosphere would have almost no effect on the beams. If our planet had an inverted atmosphere, a massive drought would begin. All the rain clouds would get dispersed in the top layers of the atmosphere. and all the moisture on Earth would start to evaporate and accumulate in the exosphere and thermosphere. Thus, we would get a new troposphere. It would be filled with gases, water particles, and dust. The previous troposphere, which would now be at the very top, would lose its weight and turn into an exosphere. But what would happen to oxygen at this moment? The higher we go, the lower the pressure and the less oxygen. But in the inverted atmosphere, there would be less oxygen and less pressure closest to the surface of the Earth. At first, people would feel as if they were on Mount Everest. Many would lose consciousness or experience severe dizziness. Others would have bad migraines and feel unwell because of dilated blood vessels. But what would happen to people who spend a lot of time climbing high mountains? They would adapt more easily, and the rest would have to do the same in the inverted atmosphere. And when people felt comfortable in such conditions, they would begin to enjoy the benefits. We would feel less air resistance. It would be like a vacuum in space. Cars would drive faster and use less gasoline. People would create trains moving at the speed of sound. While running, we would be less tired. But at the same time, planes would fly much more slowly since they would have to go through thick layers of air. We wouldn't have rain for long periods of time, and it would always be sunny. Instead of bad weather, we would face jet streams. Now these powerful icy winds circulate in the upper layers of the atmosphere. They blow over the top of Mount Everest and pose a serious danger to climbers. When the sun's rays heat the air, it rises and encounters cold winds. They push warm air even higher, where it turns into jet streams. These winds are howling at 70 miles per hour. They can easily rip out a tree or tear off some roofs. We would have to build sturdy houses and shelters to survive this calamity. But in the end, the surface of Earth would warm up and push jet streams up. In other words, even if the atmosphere turned upside down, everything would return to its place sooner or later. Perhaps this would happen in a couple of hundred years or millions of years. In any case, the laws of physics and nature would return our planet to its former state. But all living creatures may not live long enough to see it. But what if the planet's atmosphere was constantly flipping over? This is unlikely to happen on Earth, but one space object in the solar system has an inverted atmosphere. All the solid parts in it evaporate and rise, and the atmosphere sinks and becomes denser. Thus, the ground and the sky on this space body keep switching up. This strange celestial object is Pluto. There used to be a planet. The average distance between Pluto and the Sun is about 3.7 billion miles. It also has an elliptical or oval-shaped orbit, which is also tilted away from the orbits of the other planets. When Pluto comes closer to the Sun, it receives a bit of heat, and this heat is enough to turn the ice on Pluto's surface into gas. The higher this gas rises, the warmer it becomes. This is quite strange because everything happens the other way around on Earth. The higher the air, the colder it is. Now, imagine a world that has no solid surface, but only an atmosphere. This is Jupiter, the largest planet in our system that consists of gases. 90% is hydrogen, and the remaining 10% mostly consists of helium. Jupiter keeps all these gases inside itself thanks to its powerful gravitation. And the closer to the center, the greater their concentration. If a huge spaceship tried to land on Jupiter's surface, it would take a long time to reach the planet's core. But at the same time, it would be impossible to get to the center since the weight of the surrounding gases would crush any material object. Saturn has a similar structure. The gravity of its gases is so strong that it makes the rings, consisting of pieces of comets and asteroids, spin around the planet. This atmospheric blanket of air on our planet is ideal for all living creatures. For millions of years, evolution has been creating organisms that can adapt to the conditions of the atmosphere. Hey, good thing, huh?
What if we lived in a world where the moon and the sun swapped places? Yeah, I know what you're thinking. The consequences would be staggering and catastrophic. But here's an interesting take. What if we somehow survived all this? What would our life look like in such a new world? And what would happen to the solar system? Time to find out. Let's start with the moon. Did you know that the moon is responsible for the tides on Earth? You know, that thing where the ocean goes in and out like it's playing a game of beach volleyball? All thanks to our satellite's gravitational pull. The moon also helps stabilize Earth's rotation. It's pretty important if you don't want to end up like a certain planet that spins on its side. Looking at you, Uranus. Plus, it acts as a shield, protecting us from some of the more harmful cosmic rays, asteroids, and space debris. It's like our personal bodyguard. And without our satellite, we might not be here cracking jokes and enjoying life at all. Some scientists think that the moon played a crucial role in the development of life on Earth. Without its gravitational pull, we could have a crazily erratic climate. Also, the moon could have redistributed water across our planet, and we all know that water means life. As for the sun, we all know how important it is. It provides light, heat, and energy for all the planets. But, just like any good party host, the sun can get sometimes a little too intense. Never forget that it's an extremely powerful and massive star, with a surface temperature of about 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit. If it wasn't for our ozone layer, we would all get burned instantly. The distance between the Earth and the Sun is about 93 million miles. Scientists took this distance and turned it into a unit of measurement, 1 astronomical unit, or AU. The closest distance that the Earth could approach the Sun without being completely destroyed is about 0.9 AU. At the same time, if we move too far, further than about 1.2 AU, our planet will turn into a snowball. So we got pretty lucky with our location. Meanwhile, the distance between Earth and the Moon is about 0.002 AU, or 240,000 miles. It's super close to us. Now that we know how important these two are, and how much their position affects our world, let's try to swap them. Surely nothing bad will come of it. First, let's imagine for a moment that the Sun was in the Moon's place. You probably already know what will happen to us. The intense heat and radiation from the Sun would be like the world's worst sauna, with the temperature on Earth rising rapidly. Any living thing on Earth would leave behind nothing but a pile of ashes. But the destruction wouldn't stop there. The atmosphere and oceans would be stripped away by the solar wind, leaving the planet exposed and vulnerable to the radiation and particles coming from the Sun. It would be like a giant space hairdryer on full blast, with Earth's atmosphere and oceans being blown away instantly. Forget about melting ice caps. The entire planet would be one big puddle. But that was a scientifically accurate answer. Boo, boring. Now, what if we could somehow survive this catastrophe? Like, what if we had some super advanced technology to protect us from being fried to a crisp? First up, even if our planet somehow survived, things would still get pretty toasty, since the Sun would still emit way more heat and energy than the Moon. Also, unlike the Moon, which goes through periods of darkness during its lunar night, the Sun has a constant energy source through nuclear fusion. So at least we wouldn't have to worry about freezing every night. We'd just be sweating buckets in our sleep. Of course, all this extra heat would have some serious effects on our ecosystems. Plants and animals would have to adapt to survive. And we might see some major changes in the way life on Earth operates. Imagine the confusion of nocturnal animals. Without the Moon, they would have no idea how to navigate or hunt. So, what would we do in this new, super hot world? Well, maybe we could build some seriously high-tech greenhouses to trap all this heat. Or we could use some giant mirrors, or other reflective surfaces, to manipulate the amount of sunlight that Earth receives. Next, we have the Sun's gravity. Remember how we said that the Moon's gravitational pull is just right for stabilizing Earth's orbit? So, if we replace it with an entire star, things would get pretty wacky. We're talking about extreme changes in seasons, climate, and all sorts of weather-related shenanigans. Your everyday life would look like it's trying to do the cha-cha slide during an earthquake. The Earth's rotation would also speed up drastically. This means shorter days, longer nights, and lots of confusion with working hours and birthdays. So, is there any way to fix this? Well, hypothetically, we could use some massive spacecraft or other technologies to artificially adjust Earth's orbit and rotation. For example, we could launch rockets or space tugs that would slowly push our planet into a new orbit that's more stable and consistent. And that's not all. All this gravity play would also mean new tidal waves of epic proportions. We're talking waves so high that surfers would need oxygen tanks just to catch a ride. Imagine trying to sail a boat through a hurricane while riding a bucking bronco. Yeah, yeehaw! The moon also mixes up nutrients in the ocean and helps support marine life. So if we swap the sun for the moon, those nutrient-rich waters would be a thing of the past. The ocean would become a stagnant, lifeless soup, with nothing but algae and plankton to keep us company. We'd have to resort to eating seaweed sandwiches and drinking desalinated water just to survive. And let's be real, nobody wants to live in a world without sushi. So what do? Well, we could try to somehow artificially create tides or mimic the moon's gravitational pull on the ocean. Like using pumps or other mechanisms to move large volumes of water around in a way that creates a similar tidal effect. Or we could try to help marine life to adapt to the new, less nutrient-rich ocean. Maybe developing fish farming or aquaculture. Finally, don't forget about radiation. The sun is basically a radiation factory. It could seriously mess with our health and electronic devices. You think your phone is fragile now? Imagine what would happen with it under a giant solar flare. So we'd need some seriously advanced shielding technology to protect us. We're talking materials that can withstand temperatures hotter than a jalapeño's backside, and magnetic fields powerful enough to deflect charged particles. Oh, and tons of sunscreen. In summary, if we replace the moon with the sun and somehow manage to avoid catastrophic consequences, it would be a completely different world than what we know. But it wouldn't just be the Earth that would feel these effects. So what would happen to the rest of our solar system? For starters, if the sun, with its crazy gravitational pull, took the moon's place, it would start seriously messing with the other planets' orbits. They might be sent careening off in random directions, like bumper cars. The planets would also have some taste of the sun's fiery personality. They would have to deal with all the radiation and charged particles. Lastly, the sun's magnetic field is incredibly strong, and if it took the moon's place, the other planets would be forced to dance to its tune. This could cause electrical storms, auroras, and other crazy electrical effects everywhere. And what would happen to the moon itself? Unfortunately, its reign in the center of our solar system won't last too long. Most likely, it will either start orbiting the sun and be eaten by it, or simply fly away like a free birdie. So there you have it, a cosmic prank gone horribly wrong. What can we say? Let's just be thankful that such a scenario isn't physically possible, and instead enjoy the beautiful moon and the life-giving sun from a safe and comfortable distance.
Ever wondered what Earth would look like if it was split evenly between land and water? I mean, like 50% land and 50% ocean. Like a cosmic pizza with just 2 toppings split equally. First things first, we all know that water is essential for life. That's why scientists search for water on other planets to find potential life. On our own planet, water covers about 71% of its surface, with most of it found in the oceans. What if we took away almost a quarter of that water and replaced it with land? If we did balance out the land-to-water ratio, we would see some pretty drastic changes. Due to the sea level drop, regions around the North and South Poles would dry up completely. Meanwhile, every continent on the planet would expand to reveal an enormous amount of new territory. This would be equivalent to the current surface areas of Asia, Europe, Africa, and North America combined. Imagine all those new vacation spots you could explore with all that land. This shift in the ratio of land and water wouldn't be all sunshine and rainbows, though. With much less water covering the surface, our ocean currents would get messed up, leading to a destabilized climate. This would mean colder temperatures around the poles and even hotter temperatures in the already scorching equatorial regions. Rain levels would drop, creating dangerous droughts and new deserts in many inland areas. Let's not forget about the creatures living on Earth. Plants, animals, and humans would all need to adapt to being less dependent on water. Some animals may even evolve to be smaller or switch to a strictly carnivorous diet due to water scarcity. And sadly, lots of life forms in our current oceans would struggle to survive, which would be a huge bummer for all the fish lovers out there. Let's try to imagine a totally different scenario for our planet next. Back in 1884, the press reported on an astronomer who claimed to have discovered a cubic planet beyond Neptune. We've sure come a long way since then. We've come to know that in our universe, there's no possibility of planets being square, at least based on the information we have today. Let's travel back in time to 4.5 billion years ago when our own planet was just a hot mess of gas and dust. As this chaotic cloud collapsed, a hot star formed and began to attract all nearby matter with its gravitational pull. Eventually, a rotating disk formed around the star, and collisions between particles led to the formation of massive bodies, planets. And because gravity pulls equally from all sides towards the center, planets naturally take a spherical shape. But what if we spice things up and skew the distribution of gravity? Well, if you're feeling adventurous and want to live life on the edge, then welcome to the Cube Earth. Yay! We'd have 6 sides now, but don't get too excited. None of them would be any fun. You'd constantly feel like you're climbing up a steep hill, no matter where you go. That's because gravity is strongest at the center of each face. So the further away you were from the center, the stronger pull you'd feel. Say goodbye to taking standing tall for granted. If you found yourself on the edges of the Cube Earth, you'd find no lush and vibrant landscapes. All the water would pool at the center of each face, leaving the edges rocky and barren. And forget about breathing easily. The atmosphere along the edges and corners would be too thin or non-existent to support life. But we'll come back to that later. The climate on the Cube Earth would depend on how it would rotate. If it spun on an axis through 2 faces, then the climate would be similar to what we have on Earth now, but more extreme. The top and bottom faces would be polar, while the other 4 would enjoy an equatorial climate. However, if the Cube Earth rotated through its corners, each side would have a climate with more moderate temperatures and precipitation. Say goodbye to extreme weather, but also wave goodbye to your equatorial paradise. On the bright side, you would probably be able to walk into outer space. Since the atmosphere is held down by gravity, and gravity would now be pulling towards the center of each face, the atmosphere would be thicker there and thinner towards the edges. If the cubic Earth had the same volume as our round world today, its sharp corners would poke out beyond our atmosphere, creating unprotected and uninhabitable areas. But who says you wouldn't be able to rent a spacesuit and stand on top of the world and outside of it at the same time? Talk about taking your vacation to new heights. How about if our planet was completely covered with water? Well, it turns out that ancient Earth might have been just that, a water world. According to some researchers, our planet was mostly covered with oceans about 3 billion years ago, with only a few scattered islands popping up here and there. The scientists who made this discovery have been studying rock samples found in Western Australia. By analyzing these rocks, they were able to determine that they formed in a hydrothermal vent system on the seafloor over 3 billion years ago. This information could have some major implications for how we understand the origin and evolution of life. See, scientists still have a lot of questions about where Earth's water came from and when it appeared. But by studying these ancient rocks, they're hoping to get some answers. One way they're doing this is by looking at the oxygen found in the rocks. You see, water with different values of oxygen can tell us a lot about the environment in which it formed. And the researchers found that the rocks from 3 billion years ago had heavier oxygen content than we see in our modern oceans. This suggests that at that time, dry land hadn't emerged yet, which means that Earth was mostly covered in water. Now, this might not seem like a big deal, but it could actually help us understand how life first formed on Earth. If our planet was completely covered with water when the first single-celled organism emerged, then they probably didn't form on land. And if that's the case, it could mean that other water-covered planets might be ideal places to search for life. Our planet may never be fully covered in water ever again, but we might end up losing some, if not all, of our planet's hydration. Here's the deal. The sun is going to get hotter over the next few 100 million years. This isn't anything to do with humans and our shenanigans. It's just a natural thing that happens with all stars. The bad news is that the sun gets hotter, our planet is going to heat up too. And if things get really toasty, we're going to start losing our oceans to evaporation. Sure, we've got plenty of time to hit the beach before that happens. Experts have been working hard on a super fancy computer model to predict exactly when all this is gonna go down. And according to them, we've got around 1 billion years until things get seriously steamy. You might be wondering how they came up with that number. It turns out that when the sun gets hotter, it makes the atmosphere warmer too. And as the atmosphere warms up, more and more water evaporates from the oceans. There's a catch though. Water vapor is actually a greenhouse gas, which means it traps heat and makes things even hotter down there on the surface. As we lose more and more water, we're going to end up in a loop where the planet just keeps getting hotter and hotter until there's no water left at all. But hey, it's not all about us. This research could actually help us find other planets with liquid water. By figuring out what kinds of conditions are needed to keep water on a planet, we might be able to identify some other hospitable worlds out there. And who knows, maybe in 1 billion years, we'll have colonized one of those planets.
Imagine you're driving across a bridge to visit a friend. The next day, you get in your car to go back, but there is no longer a river under the bridge you drove across yesterday. Believe it or not, this is exactly what happened to people in the south of Honduras when Category 5 Hurricane Mitch hit in October 1998. Choluteca Bridge, which the local authorities reconstructed earlier that year, was left in the dry, as the river now flowed around it, not under it. The structure soon became famous online as the Bridge to Nowhere. This waterway shifted its course overnight, but it normally happens over longer spans of time. A river will stop flowing straight when there is even the tiniest change in the landscape around it. Even something as tiny as a mouse can weaken a riverbank. Imagine a family of mice decides to start a home somewhere by the river and digs a cozy hole. Over time, water gets inside this hole and starts washing away any loose soil. Give it a couple of centuries, and the river will now have a bend in this place. And if you're worried about the mice family, don't be, because they moved out a long time before the water flooded their home. Things happen even faster for small streams because, well, their beds are also smaller. The current breaks down stones, the ground takes them in, and voila, a riverbed or bottom is formed. The current is the strongest in the middle of the waterway, and its power directly shapes the riverbed. The water flowing through rivers is full of soil and other particles. All this stuff goes from the spring into the mouth of a river and into Earth's oceans. In some cases, these particles build up at some point, and that's how new beaches, probably including your favorite, are born from fine-grained sand. On the other side of the river, the flow of water is much faster, so this fast-moving current literally slams against the next bank. Then the process of erosion starts all over again. River erosion is what happens when the flowing water takes away soil. And I have to tell you, things go super fast there. That water is so energetic, it can even carve into rocks, creating a canyon. If the riverbanks consist of loose material, such as humus, that's the soil you plant a flower in, then it is easier for the flowing water to erode it. Rivers in the plains are often wide and slow because there's little resistance from the ground around them. So you don't have to worry about waves tipping over your boat on a flatland river. In the mountains, streams quickly wash away all the surface soil and gravel, revealing the bedrock beneath them. It's tightly bound, so mountain streams are literally set in stone, as they cannot wash away this bedrock. So we have erosion to blame for waterways changing their course, and also mountains and hills. When a stream reaches a mountain or simply a rock, it has two choices: to flow around it or carve its way through it. In flatlands, rivers don't have any natural competition, so they choose a more winding path. All this twisting and turning increases the river's total length from the source to the mouth. One such example is the mighty Mississippi River in the U.S. It has a lot of curves and bends, which are called meanders. In the last century and a half alone, the Mississippi changed its course several times. The last major case was in 1876 when it left the historic city of Vicksburg in the dry. 2 years later, a team of American engineers came to the area to construct the Yazoo Diversion Canal, which took 25 years to complete. Thanks to it, ships could once again sail to Vicksburg, reviving the town's economy. What happened in this southern U.S. town in the 19th century is an ordinary natural consequence of river erosion. The bends in a waterway grow sharper over time, making the water flow faster. This speeds up erosion, and individual bends slowly start approaching each other to the point they merge. When this happens, the river straightens up overnight, leaving a lake in the form of a horseshoe in the place where the bend was. This newly formed body of water is called an oxbow lake. These still water lakes either dry up, since they're no longer fed by a spring, or they turn into swamps. In some cases, humans use them as water meadows used for agriculture. Lake Chicot in Arkansas is the largest oxbow lake in North America, formed by the Mississippi several centuries ago. The source of the Mississippi is a lake in Minnesota, but a river can also start when two other watercourses become one, or when the water simply bubbles up from under the ground. Even melting snow can feed a river, like the Amazon gets its water from the Andes. Determining the source of a waterway can be tricky, so the debate about whether Amazon or the Nile is longer is still ongoing. What scientists know for certain is that the Amazon carries more water than any other river. 1/5 of all the fresh water that enters Earth's oceans comes from this South American river. When you look at the Amazon River on a map, you'll notice how it flows from Peru to Brazil, that is, from the west to the east. This direction might seem odd when you compare it to the Mississippi, which flows to the south on the map. It's so confusing because you probably know rivers flow down, affected by gravity, but down doesn't automatically mean south. Running water will try to find the easiest route down, so there are no rules in terms of cardinal directions. The Nile River is the best example of this, as it actually flows north into the Mediterranean Sea. Northern Egypt, where all those pyramids are located, is on lower ground than Sudan, where the Nile is formed when the Blue Nile and the White Nile merge. Up in northern Asia and the Mackenzie River in Canada both flow northwest, while the Yellow River in East Asia flows in the same direction as Amazon, to the east into the Pacific Ocean. These major rivers are some of the best examples that a stream doesn't have to flow from the north to the south. Gravity is the only important factor that determines which way a stream will flow, as running water is all the time pulled downwards. The flow of water is faster on steeper slopes. When there's a sudden drop in the flow, waterfalls form. Angel Falls in Venezuela is the highest waterfall on the planet, with water dropping from a height of 2,600 feet. Watch your step. In a waterfall, the falling water can easily reach the speed of a Thompson's gazelle, but as a river approaches the end of its journey, it slows down significantly. The stream doesn't have enough energy to cut into the nearby land. All the sediment it has picked up along the way, such as sandstone, slows it down. At the place where a river meets the ocean or a lake, it gets rid of the sediment along its banks, creating a delta, an area rich in fertile soil. The Ganges in India has the biggest delta in the world, several hundred miles wide and visible from space. The Amazon, on the other side, doesn't have a true delta because the strong currents of the Atlantic Ocean wash away everything the torrent brings. The deepest section of the riverbed that runs along its middle is called a channel. This is where the current is the strongest, so ships travel on top of these channels. When engineers want to expand a waterway, they simply dig a deeper channel and voila, larger ships can now pass. This is just one way humans alter watercourses. We often strengthen the banks of a river to prevent erosion or build dams that stop or divert the flow of water. The oldest operational dam on the planet dates back to the time of Egyptian pharaohs. It was, of course, the first damn thing.
When you look at the night sky, it seems like there's not much happening up there, and that the stars always twinkle at the same spot. For thousands of years, researchers followed the idea that the lights in the sky were unchanging. Sailors guided their ships using fixed stellar patterns. There are also the exact outlines of constellations we observe today, and astronomers identified them a long time ago. It seems impossible that one day we wake up and simply can't see some stars anymore. Or does it? A team of researchers at Vanishing and Appearing Sources During a Century of Observations, or VASCO, studied the sky to check how things with the stars are going. The astronomers got the data from Gaia, the European Space Agency, and compared the information from 70 years ago to that from today to see how the sky has changed. To test it right, they had to use both modern and old telescopes. And something really interesting happened up there. Over 700 stars from the old maps were missing. If one star disappears, multiple theories could work. But it's harder when hundreds of them vanished at the same time. Could it be that the data was wrong, or these stars were too faint to detect? Nope, they quickly eliminated this option because these stars had clearly been part of their earlier observations. So, the first thing that comes to mind when talking about how stars disappear is that they reached the point where they ended their lives. You can have the most massive stars of all, and we're talking about those that are way heavier than our sun, and they go through sudden changes as they get to the end, which we also call a supernova. It's a powerful explosion that later shines for many, many months, and it's still visible even across hundreds of millions of light years. But that's the point. You see the traces, unlike here. Could this be a failed supernova? That means maybe one of them collapsed but turned into a black hole and consumed the remains from the inside out without causing a powerful explosion. But no one's been mentioning any signs of a black hole being active anywhere near those stars. And what if the stars had become less visible because of dust or gas around them? This is something that can easily happen, as interstellar dust and gas do block our view of objects that are far away. But there were no traces of unusually high concentrations of dust or gas. Nothing destroyed them either. Researchers would have seen traces if something like that had happened. Plus, these missing stars were not all in the same area, which means there probably wasn't just one fatal thing that made them all disappear. Also, the stars were not at the same stage of their life, so it's not an option they were all accidentally close to their end. They weren't particularly old or young. and they were on different levels in size and brightness. At some moments, it even seemed these stars haven't vanished because of some natural events. Maybe it was something related to other civilizations that might be somewhere out there in space. Maybe that's one of the ways to look for them. We could stumble upon some secret civilizations from other planets if we carefully observed the behaviors of stars, especially those we can't explain. No one knows what exactly happened with the missing stars, and unfortunately, right now, all we have are these theories. But you have to admit, they're cool though. Maybe it's just some kind of optical afterglow caused by gamma-ray bursts, or maybe even fast radio bursts. Fast radio bursts are powerful pulses of radio waves. They can release more energy in a couple of thousandths of a second than our giant sun does in almost 100 years. We don't really understand how these energy eruptions work yet, so we don't know what they can do. But still, hundreds of stars at approximately the same time. There are between 100 to 400 billion stars in our galaxy, so we'll probably see some of them disappear too. Hopefully, we'll understand better why such things can happen. Of course, scientists are not sure about this number because we can't see all of the Milky Way stars from our home planet. Some are too faint, some are too far, or even hidden by dust or gas. But they assume these numbers based on the size, shape, and likely mass of the Milky Way. And out of billions of stars, there are a little over 9,000 of them we can see with the naked eye. If you want to see more, you need a good telescope that will reveal those fainter ones your eyes are unable to discern. Many of the stars we see in the night sky are probably not alive anymore. Stars are giant balls of gas that produce light and heat through nuclear fusion in their cores. However, stars also have a limited lifespan, and eventually, they run out of fuel and stop shining. When a star passes, it can either become a white dwarf, neutron star, or black hole, depending on its size. Scientists have discovered that some of the stars we see in the night sky are too old to still be shining. This means that they may have faded, but we are still seeing their light because it takes so long to reach us. Actually, we may be looking at the past when we look up at the stars. Check out all of the stars you can see with your bare eyes. They lie within about 4,000 light years of us. That means what we're seeing are stars that appeared 4,000 years ago. Most of the stars we know of exist within galaxies, which are massive collections of stars, gas, and dust held together by gravity. Still, there are large areas of empty space between galaxies too. And the question is, could they have any stars? It seems that these areas of space are not completely empty. There is still some gas and dust, as well as dark matter, which is a type of matter that we cannot see but we know exists because of its gravitational effects on other objects. Scientists have even discovered a few isolated stars in these areas of space. These stars didn't form there. They ended up there by accident, which means they have probably been ejected from their galaxies by gravitational forces or collisions with other objects. And there could be more of these stars than we realize, but they are simply too dim to be seen from Earth. Stars don't actually twinkle. It's more that we just see it like that from the Earth. It seems like they twinkle because of the turbulent atmosphere of our planet. The light from a star must pass through many layers of the atmosphere. Not every layer is equally dense, so this causes the light to slightly deflect and change in color and intensity. There's one star named Sirius that sometimes twinkles, sparkles, and flashes so much that some people even tend to report it as something extraterrestrial. This is because Sirius is very bright and is often low on the horizon, which means it experiences more of these special effects of the Earth's atmosphere. When in space, astronomers and astronauts who observe stars from there don't see them twinkling. Hey, want to hear something cool? Me, you, your friends, the rest of humanity, we're all made of stardust. The elements that make up human bodies and all life on Earth were formed inside stars. The building blocks of life, such as carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen, were created inside stars and were eventually released into space when the stars were gone. These elements then became part of new stars, planets, and eventually, life on Earth. The iron in our blood was created in the cores of supernovas, which are massive explosions that occur when stars fade. Some say that even the calcium in our teeth and bones is likely to come from exploding stars. The oxygen in our lungs was created in the cores of massive stars before being released into space through supernovas. Imagine you've booked a tour through the jungles of Costa Rica. All of a sudden, you stumble upon a huge stone sphere, nearly the length of a king-sized bed in diameter. How on earth did it end up there? And what does it symbolize? You immediately ask your guide. He's not as amazed as you are and tells you that there are actually several hundreds of them scattered across the south of the country. The mysterious stone spheres don't have an official name. The locals simply call them las bolas, which means balls in Spanish, while historians refer to them as Diquis spheres, after the culture that produced them. Scientists have studied the sediment layers of the Earth around them and estimate that the earliest were made around the year 600 CE, and the newest ones date to the year 1000 CE. Many of the spheres were relocated after their initial discovery, and that's why archaeologists can't date them precisely. The Diquis culture completely disappeared shortly after they were discovered by the Spanish in the 16th century. Unlike the Mayas and the Aztecs, the myths or legends of these peoples didn't survive, so they cannot explain the existence of the mysterious orbs. More than 300 of these objects have been discovered so far, with some being smaller than 1 inch in diameter, and the largest measures 6.6 feet in diameter, standing taller than most humans. Although there are ones made from limestone, most spheres were carved out of a coarse version of basalt, a type of rock that forms when lava cools rapidly. Some orbs weigh up to 15 tons, and in most cases, their surface is smooth to the touch, although there are coarse, mostly unfinished pieces. If we throw away the theory that river erosion naturally sculpted the spheres, the ancient people seem to have created them by hammering boulders with other rocks. Once they got the rough shape they were aiming for, they would polish the rock to perfection, using techniques such as controlled fracture and grinding. The mysterious spheres are located in the Diquis Delta, on the coast of the Pacific Ocean. Most of them can be found in a place called Farm 6, which, alongside 3 other sites, was proclaimed a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2014. The area contains other finds from the pre-Columbian era, such as paved areas, burial sites, and mounds. For centuries, the stone balls were hidden under a thick layer of sediment that protected them against the elements and looters until they were unearthed during the 1930s. The company that owned the land was clearing the rainforest for banana plantations when they stumbled upon these unusual stone constructions. Some were damaged by bulldozers, and some by workers trying to pry them open, as they believed there was gold hidden inside. It took a while before the authorities intervened to stop further damage to the finds. Doris Stone, the daughter of an executive of the company that owned the land, was the first to study the spheres. In 1943, she published an article in a leading American archaeological journal, turning the world's attention to the orbs. Expeditions soon followed, and archaeologists were immediately able to determine that the stone formations were human-made, probably created by the ancient indigenous population of Costa Rica. To this day, no one has been able to fully explain their function in a scientific way. It means there's still room for some wild theories about the sphere's origins and true purpose. The most popular theory in the scientific community is that the stone spheres served as decorations and status symbols, as many of them were found near the houses of chieftains. Local tribal leaders were also laid to rest with some of the smaller balls, so these stone formations were definitely associated with power in some way. Chiseling a boulder to perfection involved a lot of labor and planning, and only powerful individuals could afford it at the time. The other popular theory is that the boulders were used for astronomical observations. Individual spheres represented stars or planets, like a primitive map of the night sky. Since they were perfectly round, it was easy to roll them around. Before the jungle engulfed them, the area where they were found was a flat alluvial plain, ideal for rolling large boulders around. Another version of this theory suggests that the stones were used as boundary markers, much like modern border stones, which are also mostly made from stone. Finally, legends from other tribes that lived in the area tell of how the spheres were cannonballs that the deity of thunder used to drive away the deity of winds and hurricanes. We still don't know the original purpose of the Costa Rican spheres, but they remain an important part of the country's national identity. The National Museum in the Costa Rican capital, San Jose, has 6 of them in its courtyard. Many other spheres have become prized garden decorations for wealthy Costa Ricans. There's even one at Harvard University. More than a millennium after they were created, the mysterious stone spheres of Costa Rica are still associated with power and wealth. In terms of numbers, the stone orbs are not perfectly round. They are rated as nearly perfect, at 96% spherical in shape. And while even that is pretty impressive, the spheres of Costa Rica are not the only ones of their kind. Nearly a decade ago, workers came across mysterious giant stone spheres deep underground in a coal mine in northern Asia. The surface of the spheres, which measured a little over the length of a human footstep in diameter, was unusually smooth, and people tried to explain it somehow. Some were certain they were out of this world, and others suggested the spheres were actually petrified dinosaur eggs. Scientists quickly put an end to further discussion, as it turned out that the mysterious spheres were concretions. Those are rock formations that take millions of years to form deep underground. Think of a pebble that picks up snow as it rolls down a hill. That's how concretions are made. Groundwater, rich in sediment and minerals, flows around the sediment, slowly shaping it into a perfect orb. The process is quite common in nature, but most concretions are fairly small. The spheres found in the coal mine grew to their size in the mineral-rich ground, and they were big enough to get the press and the general public interested. Another possible case of concretions is the massive stone spheres found in the Visoko Valley in Bosnia. Samir Osmanagic, better known as the Bosnian Indiana Jones, was the first to explore those objects about as wide as the length of a London bus. He believes the stone spheres were carved by a lost civilization that lived in the area 1,000 years ago. The reddish color of the orbs, though, is proof to geologists that they are indeed concretions, rich in iron content. The Moki marbles, found in rural Utah, are similar in color to the Bosnian spheres. These tiny concretions are the size of toy marbles and consist of a sandstone core and a shell made out of hematite, an iron ore. In South Africa, miners have come across Klerksdorp spheres, which are similar in shape and size to Moki marbles. The only difference is that these ones formed inside volcanic sediments and ash. The most intriguing among human-made tiny spheres are probably the orbs found on several Greek islands. Scientists discovered 700 stones smaller than golf balls near the Bronze Age site of Akrotiri on the island of Santorini. They believe that the finds were between 3,600 and 4,500 years old. When they compared all the stones' variations in size and color, the archaeologists concluded that these enigmatic stones could have easily been the oldest board game ever made. With the help of artificial intelligence, scientists are now trying to work out the rules of this game.
For many years, we've been discussing things like flying cars, floating furniture, and even floating buildings. But what if I told you that the idea of anti-gravity isn't just some science fiction, but is a real and fascinating concept in physics, something that physicists are actually currently researching? So, what is anti-gravity, and when will we finally achieve it? Let's find out. Please, Mr. Music, give me some of that science fiction movie woo-woo music. Thanks. Imagine being able to fly to work or travel to other planets without feeling the effects of gravity. A world where you could levitate and make your household items defy the pull of gravity and float weightlessly in the air. Now you might think, I don't have to imagine. I know that astronauts live this way in Earth orbit. Duh. But it's not exactly the same. What astronauts experience in space is called zero or microgravity. It's a real phenomenon that we can actually experience. In zero gravity, objects are weightless and float because there's nothing pulling them down to the ground. However, anti-gravity is slightly different. It's not a lack of force, but a force in itself. A force that could counteract the force of gravity, essentially canceling it out. With this magical force, an object wouldn't be attracted to something massive like the Earth. It could actually repel it. This would allow objects to float freely in space or even move in the opposite direction of gravity. It sounds like something straight from science fiction, a way to defy the laws of physics and take us to the stars. From Star Wars to Star Trek, it's been a popular concept for many years. But could it be possible in real life? Is there actually a repulsive force that could counteract the effects of gravity? Scientists and philosophers have been discussing the idea of anti-gravity for centuries. However, it wasn't until the late 20th century that real progress was made in understanding the science behind it. And now, we're exploring the possibility of creating anti-gravity fields. So let's put on our scientific thinking caps and try to understand how it works. Let's start with the beloved and famous theory of general relativity. Picture yourself playing with a trampoline surrounded by toys. You know that if you jump, it will cause a dip in the trampoline, and the toys near that dip will start rolling towards it due to gravity. That's what Einstein's theory of general relativity tells us about the fabric of space-time and gravity. But what if the trampoline could stretch in ways we never imagined? What if it could also curve or bend backwards, repelling both you and the toys around you? That's the idea behind modified theories of general relativity. Some scientists have proposed adding extra dimensions to space-time or introducing new forces that could interact with matter in unexpected ways. However, as with all scientific theories, we'll need to conduct some experiments and collect data to know for sure. Okay, now let's pretend the universe is a big room filled with furniture. Scientists have discovered a mysterious invisible force pushing all the furniture away from each other, like a superpowered wind that makes everything float. They've named this force dark energy. According to current cosmological models, nearly 70% of the universe is made up of dark energy. And even though it's invisible, it's thought to cause the universe to expand faster and faster. Now you can see how this is kind of like the opposite of gravity, which pulls everything together. So, if it's true, it would mean that anti-gravity is a real force. Now, wouldn't that be awesome? The only thing we need to confirm is whether dark energy really exists and has such properties. Yeah, only. Finally, let's talk about the superstring theory. Okay, so imagine you have a bunch of rubber bands and you're stretching them. When you pluck one, it makes a sound, right? This is kind of like superstring theory. It says that everything in the universe is made of super tiny strings that are vibrating like those rubber bands. These strings can make the different forces of nature, like gravity, happen. And get this, some scientists believe these strings exist in extra dimensions where they might be able to cause things to float away, like anti-gravity. You could see this idea in some cool movies like The Matrix and Interstellar. Overall, superstring theory may hold the key to understanding anti-gravity, but it's still a theory and needs further exploration. However, there's still much skepticism and criticism surrounding the idea of anti-gravity. Firstly, many scientists say that anti-gravity is impossible because it violates the fundamental laws of physics. For example, the law of conservation of energy. According to this law, energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed. But anti-gravity would require energy to be created from nothing. So if anti-gravity is confirmed one day, it will pose a great mystery. Critics also say that there is no direct evidence for anti-gravity. Although we've made some attempts to explain it using things like dark energy, they don't provide any direct proof. This has caused a huge debate among scientists as well as those attending Star Trek conventions. So while these theories are super fun and intriguing, they lack experimental evidence. But despite this, the idea of anti-gravity continues to capture the imagination of scientists and the public alike. Many researchers continue to work on experiments that could help us better understand this mysterious force. Whether or not anti-gravity will ever be confirmed, the journey is certainly fascinating. And if we one day confirm its existence, it'll certainly be worth it. The possibilities for technological advancements would be truly exciting. Here are a few things that could become a reality thanks to anti-gravity. First, space travel. Imagine being able to travel to the farthest reaches of the universe without the limitations of fuel or resources. This is one of the most exciting benefits of anti-gravity technology. It would allow us to explore space like never before. We could create things like anti-gravity propulsion systems or sustained fields, leading to new discoveries and opportunities for exploration. Second, energy production. We could use anti-gravity to generate energy in a new and revolutionary way. For example, if we could create a containment field that could sustain an anti-gravity state, we might be able to harness the energy of Earth's rotation. Wouldn't that be awesome? Thirdly, new materials and inventions. Thanks to anti-gravity, we could develop new materials that are lighter and stronger than anything we have today. This could have an enormous impact on many industries, from construction to transportation to aerospace. It would also allow us to use space in ways that were previously impossible. For example, we could create space elevators, similar to those in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Wouldn't it be cool to travel in a glass elevator instead of a plane or rocket? Heck, for me, anti-gravity would make it a lot easier for me to haul out the garbage in recycling bins every Monday before pickup. Unloading the car with groceries would be a snap. And if you wanted to retrofit your house for earthquakes, lifting your house up to get underneath will be a whole lot easier with anti-gravity. These are just a few of the many exciting possibilities that would come with a better understanding of anti-gravity. Even though it has not yet been proven, it's always exciting to imagine what the future might hold. Overall, anti-gravity technology has the potential to change our world in profound and exciting ways. And while it may still seem like science fiction, who knows what we might discover in the years to come. And so, wait for it, that's the gravity of the situation.
They say this place is swarming with money. It's been stored there for centuries, but no one managed to take it away from this island. Treasure hunters have been bewitched with this place since 1795. Many people have tried their luck looking for the treasure that could be hidden there by the Spanish pirates or even by the Knights Templar. But today, it's impossible to get there, as it's a private place, so all you can do is book an ocean tour around this island. Otherwise, you can take a peek at it in a TV reality show starring the Legina brothers, Rick and Marty, who are a team of enthusiasts looking for the treasures of Oak Island in Nova Scotia, Canada. Yeah, seems like there's no place where TV producers can't get to. One of the most famous discoveries out there was the so-called Money Pit. Despite the promising name, it wasn't full of money. Now we have to jump to 200 years ago. The Money Pit was first found by a 16-year-old kid in 1795. One day, Daniel McGinnis went fishing at Oak Island. He saw a tree there. Unsurprisingly, it was an oak, and it had weird markings. They didn't seem to be natural, so Daniel decided to check the area. He then saw a sunken patch of ground and started digging immediately. His two friends helped him out, but instead of treasures, the guys only found logs placed underground at regular intervals. It looked like a place where someone could hide money or jewels, but nothing precious was found. However, there was something curious down that pit. Someone found a granite stone there, and it had an engraved inscription on it. There were many attempts to decode it, but most of them ended up in failure. There's one translation though, and it says, 40 feet below, 2 million pounds are buried. Yeah, McGinnis and his friends should have dug harder. The next fun thing about the Money Pit is the coconut fiber found down there. They say that large amounts of this fiber were found at a depth of 60 feet. It may not surprise you, but I have to remind you of one thing. Oak Island is in Nova Scotia, Canada. Coconut trees do not grow there. The nearest one is about 1,500 miles from Nova Scotia, which makes it obvious that someone brought this fiber purposefully. Researchers came up with an idea that coconut fiber could have been used to make ropes and lower all the treasures down the pit. Next up, we have not one, but two mysteries. In the late 1800s, the Oak Island Treasure Company was thoroughly inspecting and excavating the island. Everyone believed something enormous was hidden there. These guys managed to drill 153 feet underground. That's like 15 stop signs stacked one on top of the other. You might have guessed that they didn't find pounds of gold and diamonds, but they found a manuscript. There's a theory claiming that it's one of Shakespeare's lost manuscripts. Some scientists believe that it was hidden there by the writer and scientist Francis Bacon, the true author of Shakespeare's works. Yeah, rumor has it was Francis and not William who wrote all the plays and sonnets. But there's no proof it was really so. The Money Pit may be the most popular shaft on Oak Island, but it's not the only one, and it's not the first. Before the Money Pit discovery, treasure hunters were drilling at Smith's Cove. While damming there, they found a wooden piece. It was a U-shaped formation that had Roman numerals. After a more thorough inspection, the specialists realized it was supposedly dated to 1769. The Money Pit was discovered 26 years later. This fact created many speculations that this structure might have been part of the real shaft with treasures everyone was looking for. Now, look at this Templar coin. It wasn't the first discovery on the island, but it was crucial in some way. Even if it may not sound like a big deal today, in medieval times, those coins would amass an insane amount of wealth. They were typically stored in European fortresses. For the treasure hunters, this coin was a sure sign there was more to be found on the island. The logic is simple. If there's one coin of that kind, there must be something else. And they were right. It wasn't the only Templar discovery. On the southwest shore of the island, a crossbow bolt was found. Experts say it dates back to the 13th century. But, once again, that wasn't something the treasure hunters were after. Some more coins were found on the island. Rick and Marty Legina retrieved this precious piece from a swamp. The coin is made of copper, and this time, it originated from Spain. When it was found, the Legina brothers could only see the number 8 engraved on it. But later on, some experts studied this coin and claimed it was made sometime around the 17th century. They managed to clean it well and saw the date 1652 engraved on the back of this coin. There's a theory stating that Spanish explorers found some treasure but hid it instead of taking it to the king. So maybe this coin just dropped out of the chest full of coins and jewels and is part of the treasure everyone was after. Or someone could have accidentally lost it while looking for the treasure. Who knows? One more famous treasure hunter is Gary Drayton. Gary and his team, together with Rick Legina, came across 2 coins while metal detecting the island. Those were 17th century King Charles II Britannia coins. One of them had a very clear inscription on it, stating that the coin was minted back in 1771. Another swamp treasure of possibly Spanish origin is also here. This time, it's a silver ring. A specialist studied it closely and reported that it had been repaired twice. The ring was once made bigger, and it was also made smaller ones. It's decorated with a floral design, which was popular in Europe in the 1730s. Among all the other curious things, Rick and Marty Legina found a silver button at Isaac Point. The button's pretty old. It supposedly dates back to the middle of the 18th century, and the notorious Money Pit was discovered later. This is why it wasn't a big deal of a find. It could simply belong to some farmer peacefully raising livestock on the island. There's no official record of any chest full of gems and coins found on Oak Island, but enthusiasts did find some jewels there. First off, the team found a brooch with a magnificent red gem. They mistakenly thought it was a ruby, but a professional gemologist stated it was a garnet. The piece was made of silver, and it's pretty old. Experts believe it was made around the 15 or 1600s. Another brooch they found didn't have any gems on it, but it had an intricate design. It's a brooch with a leaf design and an ornate rope. There are 13 branches of the leaf, which instantly created more mystery to the whole treasure hunting. First off, there's a carving with a 13-branched tree on a rock on the north shore of this island. What's more, many people believe that the number 13 is important to the Knights Templar. The enthusiasts also found a brooch not far away from the place where Daniel McGinnis, the guy who found the money pit, lived. The brooch was shown to a professional gemologist, Charles Luton Brain. He had to break it to the team that there were no gems adorning this piece of jewelry. In fact, the stone that seemed to be a gem was just a piece of glass. It was processed using a special technique though, so it was leaded glass. The enthusiasts decided to study the brooch even more and found out that part of the brooch was made of gold. The specialists claim that the brooch dates back to the 14th century. Was it the treasure everyone was looking for?
Imagine you were chosen to answer one of history's most important questions. What was the first civilization on Earth? The job description is simple, yet the task is extremely challenging. You need to unearth the proof of the world's first official civilization. Was it the Sumerians in Old Mesopotamia? Or was it the ancient Egyptians spread out along the Nile River? Not to make you nervous or anything, but history is quite literally in your hands. Good luck! Since you can't turn back the clock and visit Old Mesopotamia to get the answers to your questions, you'll need to research museum databases in order to get some clues. First things first, we need a definition of what is considered a civilization. It's not just thousands of people grouped together and living harmoniously. There are some key elements that together make a group of people a civilization. Like, for example, the domain of urbanism, aka city building, irrigation systems, and writing. You decide to begin your search by diving deep into the history of the Sumerians, which today hold the position of the world's first civilization. Now, imagine being the first of your kind. This means having no external examples. Rather, it means starting from scratch. First thing you'll need, a piece of land. And since there were no active water companies in the world at that time, you'll need a piece of land with easy access to water. So, the Sumerians settled between two major rivers, known as the Euphrates and the Tigris in southern Mesopotamia around 5000 BCE. Fun fact, Mesopotamia translates to the land between two rivers. On a modern-day map, it's more or less where Iraq is situated today. Together with land, a civilization needs ways to get food. The Sumer civilization had to face a dry and hot climate, but they managed to make agriculture thrive in the region. By diverting river waters and creating reservoirs and dams, the Sumerians allowed for a series of settlements to emerge across Mesopotamian plains. The famous city of Babylon was one of them. You know, the city that supposedly had those hanging gardens? I say supposedly because no definitive proof of the real existence of this monument has ever been found. However, it was considered one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and cited as a remarkable feat of engineering in an ancient book published around 290 BCE. Although no record was found of the Gardens of Babylon, the Sumerians were recognized as extremely skilled builders. Their cities were filled with mud brick constructions, and the most impressive ones were known as ziggurats, stepped pyramids that were built for spiritual purposes. The Sumerians built a trade network to supplement scarce resources and started to exchange goods with civilizations rising nearby, like Anatolia and Egypt. The beginning of trade was what drove the Sumerians to develop what is believed to be the world's first writing system. It began as a simple system, likely dating back to 3400 BCE. In this system, each syllable was represented with a drawing. Later, it gradually evolved into a fully formed cursive writing system. Don't believe me? Take a look at this piece from the Babylonian times. This huge basalt plaque is called the Hammurabi Code. It's known to be humanity's first collection of written laws. As far as the story goes, it was carved in volcanic stone around year 1760 BCE. Look at the precision of these carvings. It's quite astonishing. But the content is also surprising, since these 282 rules vary from commercial regulations to strict laws of justice. The thing is, historians don't have a consensus on whether the Sumerians were really the first ones to invent writing. Some think it might have been old Egyptians. Let's pause here. Ancient Egyptian settlements are believed to have started around the year 5500 BCE, which is earlier than the Sumer civilization. But remember I said a civilization needed a few things before it was considered as such. Ancient Egypt consisted of several smaller city-states, such as Memphis, Abydos, and Thebes, spreading out along the Nile River. It wasn't until 3000 BCE that Egypt was unified under one kingdom and lasted as an empire until nearly 1000 BCE. Although there is no consensus on this, some Egypt experts believed that it could have been Sumerian immigrants that founded early Egyptian settlements. The proof could be the presence of cylinder seals made of hard stone, something that was widely used in Sumer. These seals were used to guarantee authenticity in legal transactions, but it's hard to say whether this method was introduced by Sumerian immigrants or simply by trade. Since the time period is not one of the criteria we can use to determine who came first, we'll have to turn to something else. But what? Like the Sumerians, the Egyptians were also highly skilled builders. Duh, they built the famous Giza pyramids and many others all over their territory. In order to enhance their building techniques, they delved into developing a more profound understanding of mathematics. They developed a new form of measurement called the cubit, which was the equivalent of an arm's length. The Great Pyramid, for instance, is 440 cubits per 440 cubits. They were also innovative astronomers, combining their mathematical skills with attentive astronomical observation. They were the first civilization to use a 24-hour division of the day. And they even created a solar calendar, which was the first dating system in history to feature 365 days in one year. Okay, it's undeniable how impressive they were. But some experts say that the dispute has to be settled through the comparison of their writing systems. Hieroglyphic writing, the first Egyptian style of writing, is said to date back to 3000 BCE. It was a composition of over 700 symbols, which were carved in stone. For a long time, researchers believed that the Sumerian writing had come before Egyptian, but in a recent discovery made by Yale researchers claims otherwise. Archaeologists have discovered a panel of 4 signs that are believed to have been written around 3250 BCE. Oh, and they've also found another rock drawing depicting a pregnant elephant that can date back to 4000 BCE. Now, there's also a third possibility that fewer people seem to mention: the Indus Valley Civilization, also known as Ancient India, located around the area of modern-day Pakistan and India. The Indus Valley Civilization is also a contender for the oldest civilization due to the uncertain historical origins of the Hindu collection of texts known as the Upanishads. The Indus Valley Civilization flourished around 3000 BCE, but records show that people in the Indus Valley were trading with Mesopotamians as early as 3500 BCE. Now, wait a minute. How is it possible? No, they weren't time travelers. This isn't a sci-fi movie. There already were agricultural settlements in the area that were slowly growing into bigger cities, such as Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro. Ancient Indian cities were sophisticated, filled with baked brick homes built in a grid system. These ancient cities even had draining and sewage systems that connected most homes and used gravity to carry waste outside of the city. They were pretty advanced. They were also an extremely religious civilization, and Hindu beliefs were at the center of their practices. Despite that, their cities weren't filled with spiritual buildings. Actually, Mohenjo-Daro's most important building was a public bath. Interesting, huh? Now, why can't we know if they were the oldest civilization on Earth? Even if some historians suspect that the origins of the Indus Valley people can be traced back to 5000 BCE, there is no concrete evidence of this, only speculation. The best proof we have is the Upanishads. The Upanishads are texts filled with philosophy, mantras, and ceremonies. The thing is, part of Hindu practices included memorizing and passing down the wisdom of the Upanishads in oral form. So it took a while before it appeared as a written script. Well, I'd say historians aren't really sure what was the world's first civilization. We can only guess at this